Call the meeting to order, please. Please rise to salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call.
Mr. Dillon?
Here.
Ms. Doherty?
Here.
Mr. Hoey?
Here.
Mayor Leahy?
Here.
Ms. Martin?
Here.
Ms. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Dakota?
Here.
7 present.
Thank you. I need a motion to approve the minutes of January 15, 2020, and place them on file. Motion by Mr. Dakota, seconded by Mr. Dillon. Permission to enter, Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. The permissions are included within your packet. The recommendations are
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I apologize. My mic wasn't on, so for our viewing audience, the recommendation is approval as written. It's included within your packet, committee members.
Okay. Any questions? Motion to approve the permission to enter by Ms. Martin, seconded by Mr. Hoey. Unfinished business. Oh. Sorry. Roll call, please.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin? Yes. Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
5, unfinished business, establishment of the subcommittees. Any questions on the subcommittees? Did a pretty good job, everyone likes them? Okay, so I need a motion to,
Mayor,
oh, Mr. Hoey, sure.
I do want to say something. I looked them all over, I'm pretty happy. I know we had some big changes. I used to want to have special ed by itself, and I don't see the high school subcommittee anymore, but these changes to me look real good. I'm glad you have a few certain people on certain ones. The first two that I'm looking at here, school improvement and performance management and curriculum instruction. I think there's other ones that are important, even the one you gave me, maintenance and all that, but these two particular subcommittees, I think we need. I'd like to make a motion that we have get a date to have a subcommittee on both of these subcommittees, if I can do that tonight. Just so you guys, so the administration can go back and get dates that work for everybody. Because I think we need a subcommittee right away on those top two. And I would like to speak on the one that I'm on, facilities and transportation. I also think I need a subcommittee plan for that. And the reason why, Mayor, is this. Whoever, and you did a great job, by the way. I think these are great. Number one is, if you look at the second one, we have
Curriculum and
yeah, curriculum and social, emotional, special education, service for English language learners, technology, all those things to me are so important. And never before have I ever felt that we need to discuss curriculum. We need to, and I know the superintendent, our new one, Dr. Boyd, is already trying to change things up. I work hard at this job, and recently, and today I learned quite a bit more today, that we have a chronic absentee problem with students at all through the system, never mind just the high school. I'm hearing the high school is upwards of 25% of chronic absentees. That rocked my world when I heard that today. So that's why I think it's important to get these two subcommittees, get it in the books, and work it out for Ms. Martin, what days are good for her. And the last thing I want to say about this, Mayor, is I love everything that's going on right now, but I think I'd want to have the administration make sure I get a message every day when we have a subcommittee. I don't care if I'm on it. I want to know about it. We used to have a hard time sometimes if you're busy, you know. You only really concern yourself with your own subcommittee. And the last thing I'm going to say, and the the reason why I think we should have one on facilities and transportation, not only do I think it's one of the most important ones too, right now I have a problem with, a very big problem in my heart with building security. With that said, I've always been someone that talked a lot about police in our schools. I'm a guy that likes them outside the schools. I'd like to have one in front of 28 schools with an AR-15. I've said it many, many times. But when I hear the street rumors and they tell me we only have 7 police inside of our schools now, SROs, instead of 9, I don't like that direction. I know it's not the best time to bring it up in this chambers. I don't want to make people scared, but to me, we need to make sure we're secured in all our schools. And I can't see for the life of me why we went from 9 SROs to 7. And that's, I'm not sure I'm exactly right on that, but I want to know. And I know the administration and I know Mr. Hall all have tried to give me an answer in the past couple of days, but it really, I'm concerned. So thanks for the time, Mayor.
I would just, if I may, I would make a suggestion that, and I can refer this, I don't know if Mr. Hall knows because he's the lawyer here, but I think we have to refer motions to the subcommittees unless the school committee would want to make a motion to have, I don't know if you would call it standing meetings and say quarterly meetings of each department, but I mean, I would suggest that maybe you work it out with yourselves that, you know, you should have your subcommittees every other Wednesday that you have off. And then that way everybody knows when the meetings are, they could be posted properly, and if that fits into everybody's schedule, then you just know you're here every Wednesday instead of being out all different days of the week. And if you really want to get a lot of work done, let's meet every Wednesday, regular meeting, subcommittee meetings, and, you know, so I would make that a suggestion too, but I think you have to kind of conference on that first. So, Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Ron. I have a request regarding the subcommittee appointments, a gentle request. I think you did a great job with it, but Mr. Dakota and I would like to switch 2 subcommittees that we've been named on. So I would give Mr. Dakota my membership on the Arts and Athletics Subcommittee, and he would give me his membership on the Family and Community Engagement Subcommittee. As you know, I came up through the Citywide Parent Council, so I am very much focused on that area, and Mr. Dakota was a music teacher for most of his career, so we thought that might be a better alignment of our interests and skills, if you are okay with that.
Yeah, I just tried to mix it up and give everybody a little different element too, that some of it, but sure, that's not a big deal to switch.
Okay, so just so my colleagues know, under Arts and Athletics, everything else is the same. Mr. Dillon is the chair, Mr. Hoey is a member, and then Andy Dakota is a member. And then on the second page, I will be listed as a member of the Family and Community Engagement Subcommittee in place of Mr. Dakota.
Sure. If I may, can I just direct a question to Mr. Hall? Are you knowledgeable in that? Do we have to, is that a change in the rules to say that subcommittees, if it's agreed upon, would be every other Wednesday?
It sounds like a lot of meetings, Mayor, but I think that's within the body's discretion.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Hoey?
Just one quick thing, Mayor. The reason why I'm so anxious is, I don't think we've had many subcommittees in the past 6 months on anything other than maybe finance in the past year. I can't even think of anything else that I want to say, other than I think we're way behind on some issues. And I'm very happy that you have Ms. Martin in charge of the top 2 and other ones. But those 2 right there, to me, like I said, I'm only one person, and myself with the SROs. I'm just a little anxious because I want to make sure we're not sitting on our thumbs when it comes to that. That's all.
Well, right, and that's, I
So-
mean, you don't have to meet every
Right, but
other
I
Wednesday.
thought, I always felt like I could make a motion now, tonight's, because we're talking about it, and that gives you time to set up a,
To poll.
yeah, to poll. I'm in no rush, that big of a rush.
Yeah.
but I think tonight I could get it started. That's all I was looking
Yeah,
for.
I just don't want to see us out every.
No,
so
I
many
don't want to be
Mondays
out
and
every
so
night
many
either,
Thursdays
except for
and I just
negotiations.
think it's easier for everyone's schedule if you know we meet whether we need it or not. I mean, whether there's a subcommittee or not, but you know that your Wednesdays are committed to school committee activities. That's my suggestion. Just Ms. Martin first and then.
Thank you very much. I think that we could, as we move forward, either this evening to put a schedule in place, or we could perhaps take these next 2 weeks to decide, and each individual chairperson can kind of make that determination. I know in the past, I have certainly tried to get back to regular monthly meetings, particularly for curriculum and instruction. It is still my intent to do that, so my thought would be that I would make that motion in the hopes of getting the support of the committee, perhaps even at our next meeting, so that that one could get onto a regular schedule, and then other chair people can choose how they'd like to kind of see their subcommittees work. Each chairperson really has the opportunity to craft that, so long as they receive the.
Okay, thank you. I
Assent
mean,
of
there
the
is a
body.
lot of work to be done. We have new administration, we have a lot of new department heads, a lot of new assistant superintendent positions since I've been gone. And I just want to make sure that, like Mr. Hoey said, we should be meeting on a regular basis to go through this while we get established again. Everybody knows everybody's routine. We know where we're heading. So that's my intent. Mr. Dakota?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to add maybe just a touch of levity to the room here slightly, because when I read the listing of chairmanships and positions subcommittees that you had put me on, and when I got to the finance and said, yeah, he has me as the chairperson, I thought my wife would laugh for 20 minutes, because I am the worst finance person on the planet. So I was speaking to Ms. Martin about perhaps letting her take the chairpersonship of that subcommittee, and she's open to that. So could we make that change also? Within there wouldn't be any change in personnel, or just she would take over. She would take over as chairperson.
Sure, that would be fine. I mean, I know you can handle the role, that's why I put you as chair. But if you guys want to switch, that's fine. There's no change in personnel, but
Okay, all right.
don't be afraid of the challenge.
No, I'm willing to be on the subcommittee. It's just,
Yeah,
you're going to have to talk to my wife, John, at some point, because she will laugh uproariously for you. Thank you, Mr.
all
Mayor.
right, so you want to make that change? Ms. Clark, did you have a question? Oh, no. All right, Mr. Dillon, are you all set? Okay, back to Ms. Doherty and then Mr. Hoey.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that in the past, we used to really handle the scheduling and all that based on the chair, right? And then we got into, under the last two mayors, that we would do it, you had to have a motion if you wanted to have a subcommittee meeting. And that, I think, was how we got out of having subcommittee meetings at all. So if we
Well,
could find,
usually you do have to make a recommendation to me, so that's,
so you want to stay with that,
well,
but,
because you have to have something to talk about. I don't think you can just,
yeah, but it
I
always
don't know,
worked.
correct me if I'm wrong, but once it's posted, you have to have something to talk about. So that's why all the motions went to,
Right,
for it to start the subcommittee meetings, the agenda.
right. But I mean, I think that it's something that is a combination of those, that we,
We can double check what the correct procedure is too.
okay.
So, okay, Mr. Hoey?
Yeah, I left one out, another subcommittee that I think is just as important as the rest of them after I heard about the high school's absenteeism, that you put Mike Dillon in charge of the athletic department. That's a tremendous move, getting me off that. I don't have children at that school. No, I'm just saying.
No, I think you have
I
a lot
just
to
think-
add, but he's
I
got
just think
questions
that's another
correctly.
spot that we can keep the kids happy, and something, we gotta change things, and I am a little anxious over this absentee, and not just with children. I'm talking about sick time, we had some pretty bad days this year with 58 teachers out on May 15th, 58, and 17 subs shy. That's why I'm so anxious, and I'm sorry I've taken up so much time. Thank you for the extra time, Mayor.
So do you want to make a motion now to discuss?
No, I like what Ms. Martin said. We can take it and come back next week, and
Okay.
that way there, we can all work dates that we want to do it, and
And you're all set, Ms. Martin?
I'm really happy, thank you.
Okay. So. You need a motion. Can't read your writing.
With said changes.
Okay, yeah, all right, thank you. So with said changes, we need a roll call to approve, so made by Ms. Doherty, seconded by Ms. Martin. So roll call, please.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Okay. It sounds like you're saying Mary Leahy, so. Listen.
Mayor.
Before we get to motions, could we have the student rep introduce herself? We want to say thank you for being here.
Hi, my name is Shaveen Gashal. I'm the senior class president of class of 2020.
Oh, good, see, we're privileged to have you here, thank you.
Thank you.
So 6, we'll get to motions. By Jackie Doherty, request superintendent provide committee with a report that encompasses the recycling efforts throughout the district, including sustainability and reuse programs currently in place at each school. Seconded by Ms. Martin. Ms. Doherty?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just quickly, I think you may recall reading in the Lowell Sun recently that UMass Lowell was named the #1 top school in the state for recycling and sustainability. Kudos to them. But also what's very exciting for me is that they're partnering with the city of Lowell. We have also made great strides, as Your Honor knows from your work on the city council, around solar, green energy, all those things. So my intent with this motion is to do a baseline survey of what we're already doing in our schools around recycling. And I specifically mentioned sustainability reuse because I think the cafeterias also are prime places. You know, those big cans that they use with tomatoes and things like those are all recyclable. So I wanted to get a baseline so that we could also be part of this huge green effort that's going on, be part of this partnership, which I think is just great for the whole city. And I think it piggybacks nicely on the report that the administration gave us on the environmental curriculum that we've been doing to really look at what's our baseline that we're doing now in these 2 areas and how can we improve. So I thank you for your support.
Thank you. Mr. Dakota?
To follow up on that motion, I know that at Lowell High School, they've been doing the whole recycling thing for as far back as I can remember. They would have kids coming around after school, collecting whatever was left in the recycling bins in the school, and they would go throughout the entire building. I mean, and that's been going on for a very long time. So kudos to Lowell High School for that as well. So, but they are doing it at least there. I'm assuming they still do.
Can I say something?
Thank you. Sure.
In addition to the recycling, I think the students are more aware of the amount of paper that we use. So as students, we try to tell our teachers if they don't need to print something out, we can just have it electronically on Google Classroom and stuff.
Oh, that's a good point, thank you. Any further
Thank you.
discussion?
Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye. 7, reports from the superintendent. Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we could take these out of order, my understanding is you had from the manager that you perhaps had a conversation with the manager's office regarding 7.1, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, yeah.
So we're going to move that. I'm not aware of what to do with 7.1, but we're prepared to move on to 7.2.
Okay, so that's going to come up. Pardon me?
Is he coming?
Oh, I didn't hear back, so no one's coming from the manager's office to discuss the repairs. I mean, basically, we voted last night to submit all the work to the MSBA for approval, and hopefully we'll get as many approved as possible. So, and then further down the agenda, we're gonna vote to approve them, right? So, okay. All right, so we'll go to 7.2.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, if we can change the technology to up the next presentation. Thank you. We should queue up the mid-year special education report. All right, tonight, as we have done with other strategic initiatives within the district, we are gratefully and humbly under the astute leadership of Mr. Mike Lovato as our new Director of Special Education. And Mr. Lovato, you arrived to Lowell when? September 23rd. Thank you for not requiring me to check my calendar. So since September 23rd to this point, incredible accomplishments have been made within the special education department. I'm going to hand the microphone first over to Chief Academic Officer Rosman Desmond, who shepherds this work, and then Mr. Lovato will share with you the details of those improvements. Mr. Desmond.
Thank you, Superintendent Boyd. This year, we've embarked on some of the, we're building on the great work that had happened prior to this year in special education. In particular, our focuses this year are on improving student outcomes, reducing suspensions, improving our core evaluations for students, and focusing on providing professional development and supports to all teachers to enable those things to happen. So Mr. Lovato is going to speak a little more in depth on those initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, school committee members, Dr. Boyd and cabinet. Thank you for having me. As Ms. Desmond said, it's really a big part of it is a continuation from the success that has already occurred, and a lot of it's fine-tuning a lot of the initiatives, and then obviously working with Ms. Desmond in her office on the partnership within the curriculum office. All right, there we go. So along with aligning, of course, the special education department with Dr. Boyd's strategic plan and Ms. Desmond's curriculum office, we've also been focusing on, as Ms. Desmond mentioned, the teaching and learning within the department itself, working with our special education teachers on empowering them with the curriculum, and reminding really the schools and everybody involved that special education is about access to general education curriculum. So reinforcing that we shouldn't be doing something different. It's really about how do we get in line with what the regular education classroom is doing and support our teachers to be there. Provide professional development in areas that are identified. We're also working with teachers and related service staff along with administration to identify those areas, as we're not, I don't have the ability to be in the classroom in the schools all the time, so I really have to listen to the teachers and administrators to make sure that we are targeting correctly. Number three, a big part that we're looking at is our core evaluations, making sure that we're not redundant in areas, but also making sure that we're really working with our students to identify appropriate disabilities, appropriate supports, and appropriate identification of need. And again, with the ultimate goal of access and making sure that no matter where you come from and who you are, if there is a need, making sure that we have the ability to support and identify. And then, as Ms. Desmond mentioned as well too, is to look at student suspensions. We are working with the state on out-of-district long-term removals, and then just overall suspensions when compared to regular suspensions. And then working within our department to see where we can streamline the data, streamline process, procedures, to make sure that we're effective as a department and that we're not setting up additional bureaucracy within our department as well to get the job done. Oops. A big part that we did, and this is something that was dear to me too, I was an adjustment teacher as well too, as a teacher. And one of the biggest struggles that I had personally, and when you look at a lot of our adjustment programs, is when you're at a middle school or a high school or even an elementary, you're teaching 4 core subjects. So I may have been a good math teacher when I was an instructor, but language arts may have been one of my deficits. So it's hard. And so to support our teachers, what we did do is we purchased components of the toolbox, and it helps our teachers with the development of lesson plans, with the development of quizzes, progress monitoring, and additional resources so that they can take advantage of our current systems, and again, take advantage of a curriculum that's mapped for them based on the students' needs. And we have worked with them on providing training, and then we're following up with coaching as well too. So that's a big initiative for each one of our middle schools. The way we would see that as well too, if we have success, which I do predict, then my goal is to extend that as well to the elementaries, and that we've also implemented that at the Laura Elite. And so that is a K-8 program, and we would love to be able to build off of that next year. Big part that we're working with the middle schools now, and this is a work in progress. Some of our middle schools didn't have, or needed support rather, I should say, with basic structures, level systems, token economy systems, reinforcement schedules. And so what we have done is we've worked with the middle schools. There's a program that's called the BEST program. Dr. Christine Akers is the developer of this program, and it was out of Pennsylvania. And what it is that's a level system, and it reinforces the 45-day placement in these adjustment programs to make sure that at 45 days and every 45 days and every progress meeting, therefore, that we're talking about how to get that kid back into the regular ed classroom when they have been able to gain or access skill sets within the behavior components, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to include the students back in there. Improve student outcomes, social emotional learning. When you look at our numbers as of today in each one of our adjustment programs overall, we're down. We do contribute that to a few factors that are taking place. One of it is the supports that are provided. Administrative awareness, we're consistently having conversations with our principals. It's a consistent topic every week when we meet with our evaluation team chairs. And then we have set up some processes that would help us to staff these placements with ETCs in the administration when they are considering a placement in a sub-separate program, whether that would be an in-house or whether that would be the Laura Lee or the blank. So we continue to do that. We will continue to do that. Big part of it is our special education team supports as well, and working on what skills they need, and reminding that when we're considering one of these placements that it's not a reactive decision to maybe an extreme behavior or a behavior that we may not be comfortable with, and that we're looking for more patterns, and that we're making sure that in any time that we're considering a placement that we've initiated the appropriate supports and the appropriate interventions before we consider a more restrictive environment. We're looking, a tool that we've implemented is a continuous supervision protocol. So at this point, we have a number of students that have been identified for what the district calls one-on-one support with paraprofessionals. This is a very restrictive placement, although it's needed. I don't deny that. It's needed for a number of our kids. I believe today we have 41 kids that are identified as a one-on-one professional. The part that we're looking at is an evaluation system to be able to gather that, and it would require a couple of observations. It would be really looking at the safety needs, the medical needs, and making sure that we're supporting not only the student, but also the paraprofessional. We've added a goal to the IEP to look at independence and the eventual generalization of the behavior so that we can reduce the time with a paraprofessional with a student. And then we're working with the teams on developing appropriate skill sets for the goals so that we can also monitor and communicate with our families and communicate with our students where appropriate and our IEP teams to ensure that we understand what success looks like. And if we don't have the success that we envisioned with the paraprofessional support, then we could make readjustments as needed.
Sure.
For continuous supervision, yes, ma'am, but we have total in our district for special education, we have 265, I believe. Maybe a couple, I could be a couple off, but it's a round number is about 260 special education paraprofessionals.
And then, so 43-ish was doing the continuous, just one-on-one.
Yes, ma'am.
And that doesn't include any students who would just be on a, sorry about that, on a 504 as opposed to on an IEP.
That is separate from a 504.
Okay.
I have seen our numbers for a 504. We have a handful compared to what special ed is, but there's a significant difference.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask that. Thank you.
So this is a much bigger challenge, and it's going to take a few years to really address this, but without a district placements, I know that looking at our numbers as of today, and I'll say this with caution as well too, because at any given point, some things can change. We have a total of 115 kids currently that are placed out of district, and we're continuously working with our schools, DCF, and a number of agencies that have the ability to place. What I can say that I am happy about is we've only had, as far as the district, we've had 3 students as of to date that the district has placed and out-of-district placements. 2 have been through settlement from the previous year, and 1 has been because we identified a need. The rest have been placed through DCF or outside agencies, and so they're either cost shares or they live in Lowell for whether it would be through placement, last known residency, or some of the other factors that are taking place. As of today, when you compare these last two quarters with the previous 2 quarters, we're down about $500,000 in what total spending is. But again, I say that with caution. If something changes tomorrow with DCF or with some other placements, then those numbers would be wrong. We are going to continue, and I do meet with DCF as of today once a month. And what we are working with DCF on is making sure that we are at the table at least, when decisions are being made to place students out of district. And then I work with our ETC in making sure that we are at the meetings at each one of the collaboratives and that we're reinforcing that we want our kids back. And where appropriate, we're pushing the issue as we believe we have the supports to serve a lot of our kids that are in out-of-district placements as of today. Staff professional development, unless the committee would like me to, or Dr. Boyd or the cabinet, I'm going to just highlight a few areas, as there's a number of areas that we have trained. I do want to point out, if this lets me, we have developed a teacher resource, and it didn't work. So, oh, it didn't? So I could double check. We have developed a teacher resource, and that's with all the forms and the supports that we feel at this point that are most frequently asked from our teachers, and then we're building on that as we speak. One of my assistant directors developed the website, and so we're very proud of it. Teachers are utilizing it, and anytime we can hear some feedback, we would love to hear if we're missing something and how we could expand the resource as well. We are looking at as far as other trainings as well, we're working with the TAP process, the teacher assistant teams, manifestation determinations, really changing on how we look at the restraint training in our district, reminding staff and people involved in the IEPs that CPI is really not about restraints, it's about the de-escalation components. And I'm also a certified CPI trainer as well, and that's the part that we're shifting to make sure that our trainers understand that no, it's the de-escalation, the restraint is the crisis. And we have to also recognize that if we do get involved with the restraint, whatever plan we have in place failed. And so the team has to be back at the table, addressing what interventions were not effective and what needs to change in order to stay away from restraints and remind our staff that it is a last resort. Continued staff development, one of the things that we worked with not only our social workers, but we did this with the regular education social workers, is teaching the basic components of a functional behavior assessment. Functional behavior assessments help us identify the target behaviors, and so that we could provide interventions based on settings, based on root analysis, based on antecedents, and a number of factors that we would look at for what behavior support looks like. So at this point, we've provided training so that it could be implemented through the TAP process and that our BCBAs can consult, but an FBA is not something that a BCBA must and should do. It's something that certified staff do have the ability as long as they have the appropriate training. So we'll continue to support in this area, and we've also worked on developing some basic forms of the functional behavior assessment so that teachers and staff can understand the basics without feeling the complexity of what a BCBA does. And so we're about to roll out our forms as well too and upload it onto our Easy IEP system, and we'll continue with work with regular education programs and school administrators to make sure that they have the appropriate information as well too, and the training.
If I can just jump in for a quick
Yes,
question
sir.
on this. So it doesn't specifically say this, but basically what staff professional development and support will do too is is there a safety net to make sure that all teachers in the beginning of the year read all IEPs, 504s. Sometimes it slips through and people don't read them in time, or,
Yes, sir. We will ensure that as IEPs are being changed, one of our things that we're having discussions with our evaluation team chairs is reminding and reinforcing that the IEP should be a guiding educational document rather than a compliance document that goes into somebody's drawer. And so then our task as well too is how do we shift it to where it's not a compliance document as well, if I would use that same language, and that it's an educational document. And then at the beginning of the school year, we'll have forms ready where all teachers will have to sign that they received the accommodations and that they've read the accommodations, and then our evaluation team chairs and our support staff will be available to support teachers in making sure that they do understand, and if they have questions, we can train.
okay, and then the same for parents, right? Is it every 3 years that forms have to be filled out by the parents, or is it every year, just every 3 years?
So there's both, Mr. Mayor. There's the annual IEP that takes place.
Yeah.
And then there's the reevaluation process that takes place every 3 years to re-identify the student with a disability and reassess our assessments to make sure that we've had the identification appropriate.
All right, and those have to be signed by the parents every year then?
Yes, sir.
All right, and what's the follow-up when people get busy and just don't look at their mail? What's the follow-up on that?
What's going to have to follow up is at this point, we have special education admin team meetings with the principals on a weekly basis, and so that's where the follow-up would initiate. When we have progress meetings quarterly, that's another place where we could identify if teachers are understanding the accommodations or if staff are following. So there are regular checkups throughout the year that would help us to ensure this compliance factor.
Okay, so specifically, just one question if you don't mind. If someone has a new item added to their IEP, in the past, services weren't given until parents signed.
Correct.
And that could go on for months. So what's to prevent that from happening?
I understand. So the parents have 30 days for the rejection of the IEP.
Right.
And so if it's rejected, then what I am doing with our staff is we're making contact with the parents personally, and we are scheduling the meeting and pursuing that with a little bit more aggression, if that's the appropriate word. And then also part of our parent liaison position, the special education liaison would also assume this responsibility, and they would reach out to the parents to see if it's something they're confused about.
Sure.
If there is just a minor dispute that could be handled. And then in some cases, we've done this once already, is the district actually recommended and requested mediation as we were not able to get somewhere with the parent, and we continued back and forth with the rejection. So we requested mediation, and I can say that that case has been settled.
Okay, that's fine. I just don't want things to go on for months when people say, well, I'm sorry, I just didn't see the letter. So, okay, that
Agreed.
sounds good. Thank you.
So part of this is what the mayor was referring to as well, as the family advocate. The family advocate that the committee approved, I don't know if it was about a month ago, this person would assume the responsibility of the rejections and reaching out to the parents, working with the principals, working with the IEP teams, and working with the families, most importantly, on bringing that bridge together to make sure that whatever disconnect is there, that we don't wait for the state to jump in, that we're taking the initiative to solve the problem and be available for the parents, and also to remind not only our administration, our teachers, and everybody involved is the parents are an equal party at the table. And so if they do have a disagreement or they don't understand, it is our responsibility to make sure that we're educating them and that their procedural safeguards are in place and that we are honoring that and supporting that. So that's a big part with this. I do think that this will bring down the rejections, and it'll also help reduce the amount of mediations that are taking place as well. We are also working with the SPEDPAC to provide some trainings on the procedural safeguards, trainings on our process and procedures, what a basic IEP looks like, IEP development. The SPEDPAC has asked that we would work with our parents too on actually writing an IEP together. I've met with Ms. Phillips on, I do forget the name of the organization. Ms. Phillips, if you can remind me.
CMAA.
Yes, thank you. They've asked us to do a training as well too, to make sure that we're supporting the understanding of the IEP process, and we are trying to connect on developing some dates as we speak And so that would be another area that we're reaching out to the community to try and bridge that gap as well. The transition player, that's something that's happened for years. The only reason why that's noted up there is we are supporting, we are a part of it, and we're making sure that we're working with them every step on the way to support their process in this as well. So supports for community partners. We have reached out to the police department. We got a training planned on March 11th with the SROs. And what this is going to be is best practices, working with students with disabilities, understanding basic disabilities. So if we say this child is autistic, what does that mean? What are characteristics that we can help our SROs to identify? What are best practices that we can help our SROs? And then how do we arm them with some resources that they can support our kids, or do they know who to come ask for information? And we will continue to work with them as long as we can as well too. Autism is just one of the factors that we'll look at. We'll be looking at low incidence disabilities, which would be autism, intellectually impairment. We'll also work with our separate programs. If somebody's in the adjustment program, how should we approach our kids? How do we make sure that we're not the cause as adults in some of the behaviors that do come from their identified disability? A big push that we are changed. This is a big change. We have a number of parent requests for evaluations. At the beginning, I was getting about 25 to 30 a week. That is extreme. That's quite a bit. And sometimes it would be somebody a doctor would put autism on the doctor's note, and so the team was then pursuing autism, even though there wasn't an educational need. So our school psychologists do have the ability to evaluate and determine an educational autism identification. And so I do emphasize the educational because we're not able to identify medically, but we are able to identify educationally. And so if we're able to do that, then that information that comes from the doctor, the information that comes from the parents or a private resource, that's a variable that should and will be considered. But our job is to identify if there's an educational impact based on the disability. And it also supports in making sure that regardless of who the family is and where they come from, unfortunately, some of our families don't get regular care, and care may be sporadic at best, and we don't need that to be able to identify supports, and we don't need that to be able to identify appropriate identification moving forward in supporting our kids with special ed. We're looking at the reevaluations on how we improve that process. Siri doesn't understand me.
Speak more clearly, less education jargon, please.
Okay. We're looking at our evaluations, as Mr. Mayor was talking about the 3-year cycle. You know, how do we look at a review of existing evaluation data rather than doing some of the SAVE achievement testing every 3 years? One of the things that we've supported our social workers in doing is there was not an evaluation tool to be able to identify when and how a student qualifies for social work services within the IEP. Oftentimes they were just added to the IEP, and that is not an appropriate way to identify. And so we've identified, actually I worked with the school social workers and them as a cohort, identified the tool. And so now when a need is identified, a pattern is identified with behaviors that need support within the IEP, we have a screening tool to be able to identify how and when we serve the child. Continued current projects. I'll be working with the curriculum office on the multi-tiered system of support, evaluation of data systems. That's going to be a consistent and constant. Continued support for principals, reminding our department is we're not there necessarily to tell principals how to do their job. Our job is to how do we support principals and making sure that we're supporting kids in the department, in the building, and that we're making sure kids are successful. We've developed a reading and dyslexia committee working with the curriculum department. There's 2 major components to that. One is a screening tool for all kindergarten kids to identify discrepancies or concerns in the area of reading. And then the second part is the dyslexia identification and how do we pursue supports, and then that'll lead to ultimate training and next steps that would happen from there. Future goals, continued collaboration with the Office of Teaching and Learning, continued improvements. We'll continue to work with CPI, restraint data, supervision, manifestation training for not only our principals, but within our department as well. Continued requirements, improvements rather, with partnerships with parents in the community, and so forth is some of the things that I mentioned before. I know I'm taking up a little bit of time. I stand for any questions if the school committee or Dr. Boyd or anybody would like to ask.
Sure, Ms. Doherty.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to something you had said earlier about not being reactive and trying to get our numbers down in these sub-separate school programs, because I do believe they're not terribly effective. That I guess, and my question is really, when we talk about supports within schools, I realize that's a pervasive question across the district, but has there been any thought, or do we have a team that could perhaps go into a school? Let's say you've got a couple of kids that are acting out, and you know one child acting out can disrupt a principal day after day after day, disrupt classrooms and all that. Rather than have to pull them right out, has there been any thought to creating a crisis team, if you will, that could go into the school, work with the school staff, work with the student for a period of time, maybe days, maybe a week, I don't know, to help kind of get that person back, get that student back on track, rather than looking at, we got to wait till he totally blows up and then put him in this sub-separate school, or worst case scenario, out of district. So I'm just wondering if there's been any talk about, because you talked a number of times about the supports in place, and really what did those supports look like, and could there be something on that idea that's a kind of a moving support team?
I want you to, two things if you could, Committee Member Doherty. One, hold that question in part to the next presentation, which you're going to hear about the Renaissance Network and the intensive support for our high-need schools. However, specifically related to special education, Mr. Lovato, if you can provide response in that regard.
Yes, sir. So there's two parts that we're really looking at. First off, reminding our teams that the teacher assistant teams can work specifically on identifying students for behaviors alone. It's not just the reading deficits or math deficits as what many people suspect. And then really working with them on identifying two areas. That was the whole purpose of working with our teams on the functional behavior assessment. Sometimes we put interventions together and they're not addressing the behavior, so what's called a replacement behavior. If we're not addressing that appropriately, then the kid continues to seek that attention or whatever is identified as the function. So that's a big support. Being available for our principals, being available for our teachers for just staffing some of these items, and the awareness factor. We have not thought about creating additional teams, as we do have teams in place at each one of the school sites that include a school psychologist, a BCBA, a social worker, and along with our ETC that are staffing each one of these scenarios or concerns with students on a weekly basis, and then at that point, providing interventions following through. The reactive part is making sure that we're pushing back where necessary as a department. If a student makes a mistake, and the thing that I share with our principals and I share with our staff members, if I could find 5 other kids out in the building that are performing some of the same behaviors, then if I'm placing a special education student in a behavior room, I'm being reactive with the special education student. And so then I need to look at that student a little bit different and support them as I would a regular education child, and which is still complex. I'm not preaching that it's easy, because it is very difficult.
Mr. Howie.
Thanks, Mayor. Through you to Mr. Lovato. I've already talked to you on 2 different occasions, and I appreciate the time you've given me. Number one, the Student Opportunity Act, I think, is the thing we need, because we're trying to be so inclusive. And I've already talked to you about, and I know I talked to the superintendent about speech pathologists, how I think we're losing them. And I hope we can retain the ones we have and maybe even add on to that. But I also liked your presentation because, I mean, I've been involved in schools for the past 25 years, and I try to stay focused. And if I don't say nothing about special ed, I probably won't eat at home. My wife will get mad at me. But my thing about dyslexia, I've seen that at the end of your presentation here, if this is the end. It's an issue that touches me personally over the years, because a lot of children, 1 out of 5, I believe, I've done some research, I know you've already told me I was right on that, 1 out of 5 children have dyslexia. And in the past 5, I would say 5 to 10 years, we have so many autistic kids and all kinds of things being this inclusive that I think the system has failed children with dyslexia. I don't think we have many employees that are even trained to deal with children like that. The school that my grandchildren was, and he had an IEP diagnosed with dyslexia, he got a volunteer, year after year, a volunteer, great guy. My grandson could manipulate him and to do all his homework. So I'm not saying dyslexic kids don't know what they're doing. Some of them are very sharp. They just have a real hard time reading. So when I see that issue, like No Child Left Behind, and then I hear professionals tell me we got to make sure children are reading by the 3rd grade, I don't like that. I don't even like hearing that. I believe we need to, if a child can't read at a 1st grade level, why are we sending that child to the 2nd grade and then the 3rd grade? And then they start faking their way through the system. I don't think I got caught until sophomore year in high school that I couldn't read. And the only one that caught me was Mrs. Keeley lady there, if you remember her. I thought I was sharp until I run into her. I found out I wasn't that sharp. But I want to compliment you on all the hard work.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the time you've given me on the side. And I know my wife has heard me talk about dyslexia, but if you could just touch on those 2 issues for me real quick, speech pathologist and dyslexia.
Yes, sir. So with the dyslexia committee and the reading component, there's 2 factors. First off, reading, it's not just about the comprehension itself. There's several factors that come within reading and how we teach kids to read, and there's several areas that could be identified deficits for a student within reading itself. And so part of the challenge that we have with the committee is to identify an appropriate screening tool that's not looking at the education received, but it's looking at the skill sets and the ability of a child prior to entering education. And so it's something that we would look at in kindergarten, for example. It may be within the first 10 to 20 days. And so that we're looking at the skill sets that I imagined, and like I mentioned, and then from there we would be able to identify appropriate screeners or further evaluation if we needed, or further assistance if needed, to be able to target the reading components that have been identified by the screener itself. As you mentioned, Mr. Committee Member, there is some challenges with dyslexia. First off, you are correct in that there is a high rate of identification or lack of identification, but the rate itself is high. And for the most part, students who are identified with dyslexia are of typical cognition, of typical ability. They're very average. You know, if all of us took a test here, we may be of a certain average score, and most kids that are identified with dyslexia would fall within that same range as well. So that's also where students get frustrated, and sometimes the result is increased behaviors, increased acting out, that helps them to avoid the feeling of not being able to keep up with their peers or not being able to understand. And so if we're able to dive down with the identification of dyslexia and understanding how to support it, and then the trainings that are needed. The training is a separate factor and something we're talking about as well. And we have some teachers in our district that are identified and certified in Orton-Gillingham, Wilson. Those are certifications and training that will support dyslexia, but we also need to be able to sustain it over time. Orton-Gillingham takes a few weeks to get certified, and if we lose a teacher, it's hard to keep that up. If that is the identified tool that best supports our kids, then we're really going to have to look at how we maintain it and how we continue to support our teachers long term. In regards to speech therapists, you are correct. They are critical. As of today, we have 24 speech therapists with 4 SLP assistants. And so we've been able to maintain caseloads, which I feel are appropriate. And they are within the national average and within the state average. As I was mentioning, you know, there's not any position in our district that one more may not help. But at this point, we are servicing correctly. And we have lost 2 this year. We were able to replace 1, and we're down 1 as of today that we've been looking for. The position's been open now for about a month. We've made 3 offers, and in each case, they declined for private work and went somewhere else.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Sure, Ms. Clark?
Just a question on dyslexia, the screening tool. So we're planning to implement it where it's all kindergarten students, but what about students that are coming in at other grade levels? Is there assessment going on if they've been identified as having some difficulty or not reading at grade level?
So, ma'am, they would, if they're coming in at 2nd and 3rd grade, we would have to look at their existing data. And so we do not have an identified screener for somebody who would come in as a 3rd grade student, but the ideal situation is that we would be able to review the assessments and the data that are coming from another school. And then that would be our first target. And then the nice thing about teachers is there's continuous assessment every day. And so then we would be working with our teachers at that point to be able to identify a student for a teacher assistant team and then immediately provide supports. If we would have to jump tiers and maybe skip tier 1 and jump to tier 2 interventions, then we would work with our teachers on doing that appropriately.
Sure, Mr. Dakota?
A follow-up on that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there assessment tools for those different grade levels to identify dyslexia?
Yes, sir, there will be. That's the second part of the committee, and so sorry if I didn't answer the question correctly. The screener itself is for reading in general that will include dyslexia components, but if we do determine through a teacher assistance team that dyslexia may be an identified need, then at that point, yes, we are looking to identify the tools that we would use in regards to assessment so that we could appropriately identify a student who may have dyslexia at any age, K-12. Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Any further discussion? I just have one quick question too, if you don't mind, from up here. So one thing I observed over the years is there, with support, is there any type of a program you're looking into that some children may need to transition out of their IEP? Because once they're on IEP, which happens and may not happen here now, but you know, we just can't cut them off cold turkey. So are there any ideas for transition plans for some students that may be able to transition out of an IEP?
So, Mr. Mayor, this was actually some conversations we were having today. It would not be a program, but it would be based on the individual student. And so if we are tracking progress and monitoring progress appropriately, then these conversations should be happening every year. So when we're meeting for the annual IEP, the conversation should be what progress is the student making? Is the student making adequate progress in the general education setting? Are they able to keep up with their peers? What does access look like? The conversations are more specific to our sub-separate programs, and how do we make sure that when a child is in an autism classroom or a life skills classroom or a student identified for behaviors, that we ensure the academics never suffer because of the programs we placed them in. And so that's why the tools and the conversations are happening, that we should be evaluating every 45 days and not wait for the annual IEP to talk about progress, to talk about impact, and so that the kid is reminded and the families are reminded too that there is a celebration at the end. You know, if we can attain these skills, and the celebration is to get them with their typical peers, as these kids don't want to be in these programs either. They understand that they're struggling, and they understand that that in some cases that's kept them away from their friends.
Okay, but to the point that Mr. Hoey made, like dyslexia, we just can't cut someone's services right off.
Correct.
So you could reduce them and keep them in the skills setting that's helping them keep their grades up and their enthusiastic, you know, their enthusiasm for learning. But how, is there a plan for that though? I understand you're gonna monitor, but we should probably have a discussion on that, on how to transition students over, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, without question.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Superintendent, so if we're all done, are we all done
Mayor.
with 7-2?
Mayor,
No, that's what I was gonna ask.
Mayor,
Yeah.
if my colleagues don't mind, can we suspend the rules so Mickey Dirk, and I forgot
I
all
was
about
gonna say,
it.
we have a registered
Oh,
speaker
great.
for 7-2, so.
I just wanted
Sure,
to
why don't we
see
have
if we could
the
let her
speaker
speak.
come up?
If I could, before we do such, Committee Member Hoey, I think it's important to recognize, I mean, we're talking about here 1 semester of school, less than a year's worth of work. All of this has been accomplished. In addition to entering a new community, which was raised as a public concern of this committee for the individual here in front of you, I think it's worthy of a little bit of recognition of this amount of work coming in. So thank you, Mr. Lovato. Thank you for your commitment to our children, and I'm incredibly proud of the progress that's been made in the Special Education Department under your leadership. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd, appreciate that.
Thank you very
I'm happy
much.
to be here.
Sure.
Mickey Dumont?
Good evening, everyone. Mayor Leahy, Dr. Boyd, school committee members, especially our 2 new ones, Ms. Clark and Mr. Dillon, welcome. I'd like to preface my remarks, did I give my address? Do I need to do that?
Yeah, you do.
Thank you, Mayor. 62 Wynwood Road.
Thank you.
I'd like to preface my remarks tonight by referencing the Massachusetts law known as Chapter 222 that was implemented in 2014 for all public schools. A couple of the priorities of that bill were to limit suspension of students and also require schools to create alternatives to exclusions from school. The reason behind the bill included research citing that many of the suspensions in the year prior to the bill were primarily for minor incidents, and these suspensions were incurred by higher percentages of Black and Latino students, students with disabilities, and English language learners, all of whom are, coincidentally, members of the same subgroups of students who have the greatest challenges with high-stakes tests, aka MCAS. Much research on the practice of suspension clearly confirms that taking students out of the classroom most always increases rates of student dropout and the likelihood of future arrest and incarceration, contributing to what we now commonly know as the school-to-prison pipeline. Unfortunately, in attempts to keep behaviorally challenged students in the classroom to protect their rights to an education, the unintended consequence of this bill is that the rights of all other students are being violated when disturbances continue because effective consequences are not in place to address interruptions. In tonight's packet, Special Ed Director Lovato's mid-year special education update, which he just presented. Nice job, Mr. Lovato. It includes goals that propose to review and evaluate current support systems and also to reduce student suspensions. I think all of us agree that students should be in class learning. But these goals will require input from our entire community, with teachers and parents at the forefront, to share in the responsibility of attaining optimal learning conditions for all students. As we look to reduce suspensions, we must also be sure to maintain and follow through with the appropriate effective consequences. The UTL leadership, along with Dr. Boyd and his team, have engaged in multiple discussions about the escalating disruptive student behaviors at all levels, and important steps have been taken to address some problem areas. There is much more work to be done, and we need your support to do this. This student behavior is a crisis. It's a crisis not only unique to Lowell, it's a crisis statewide and nationwide. That said, it should be noted that despite the challenges we're facing, there is still every day in every school phenomenal teaching and learning going on. I have made, teacher in me is doing this, I have made several copies, one for each of you, that include LPS student conduct policies from the LPS policy manual, as well as an excerpt from the student handbook, which lists major and other violations, and also a copy of a fairly recent article entitled, What if schools focused on improving relationships rather than test scores? I hope when you read the article, you'll all want to replicate the one district in Georgia that chose to focus on improving relationships. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I have some skin in this game. 2 of my granddaughters, both smart, kind, ambitious, athletic, fun, and beautiful. They're right behind me, so say hello to Maya and Ella. And their beautiful mom, Jen. They attend one of our challenging middle schools. I want them, and I want all of their classmates, to be able to go to bed each night and sleep easy, knowing that they'll have a great day in school the next day. Because all of us here, and parents and teachers as well, were able to make things right for all the kids and for all the teachers and staff who work so hard every day to meet the needs of our kids. Please make this your very top priority for the rest of this school year. We really need your total commitment that will address these issues. Thank you very much. Oh,
Thank you.
I have packets, John.
Yep, hand those out.
I have 6 for the school committee, 1 for the mayor, 1 for Dr. Boyd. And if anybody else would like some, I'd be more than happy to make them up. They're really very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we get going, Dr. Boyd, are there any questions with 7-1? We have Alex McGee here from the manager's office, and are there any questions on the vote for the accelerated repair program? He can run through the program if you'd like, or if you feel you're comfortable with it, we can just continue on to the vote. So what's the wish of the body? Do you guys want to see the presentation? It takes about 5 minutes. Okay. Sure. Mr. McGee?
All right.
We got to cue you back up.
Let's see if we got. We'll just jump in and give a little overview of what the Accelerated Repair Program is. It's run by the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and the program exists to preserve existing infrastructure, aging school building facilities. I got a clicker that I think might work here. Yeah, that should be good. Okay, thank you. So it's a competitive state, say again? It lives under here, yeah. So it was there from last night.
Thank you for coming tonight, Mr. McGee.
Oh, my pleasure, yeah.
Value is already served to this community. We appreciate that.
So just again to quickly introduce myself, I'm Alex McGee. I'm assistant to the city manager. I work out of the city manager's office. And we've been collaborating with the school department on these applications and these projects. So the Accelerated Repair Program, it's a competitive grant program that's administered by the MSBA. It provides funding to offset the enormous cost burdens of roofs, boilers, and windows and doors. In order for a project to be eligible to submit what's called a statement of interest, it has to meet some minimum thresholds. A boiler and a roof need to each be at least 20 years old. And then windows and doors need to be at least 30 years old, and they also have to be an estimated at least $250,000, which surprisingly most of these projects are. So based on the number of applications the MSBA gets each year, they slide those minimum age thresholds upward. So last year, roofs were slid up to 27 years, I believe, and boilers were, I think, 23 years. And so then they brought in projects based on those numbers. They didn't fund windows and doors last year. A little background on Lowell's participation in these projects. The Green Repair Program, which is a predecessor to the Accelerated Repair Program, the city submitted 20 applications over 4 years in the early 2010s, and we had 4 projects that were funded through the program. Before last year, Lowell had not pursued funding through the ARP since 2014. We learned of that. We devised a plan to get these things up and running and try to play catch up, if you will.
And so the city council commissioned what's known as the EMG study, which is a sort of a comprehensive study of all municipal building facilities, including schools. And so that kind of has been guiding our efforts on this. So this is an evaluation of eligible projects, things that meet the minimum thresholds to submit a statement of interest. You'll see that there are 8 projects that are currently in progress. Both a roof and a boiler underway at the Sullivan and the Bailey School, and then boilers at both the Daly, Greenhalgh, McAuliffe, and Rogers schools. You'll note that the projects that have a red no in them, that means that they're not eligible to be applied for. So sometime over the last 10 or 15 years, the city has replaced those through capital program expenditures. Anything that's green is something that I'm currently working with the school department to prepare applications for, and those will be submitted to the MSBA by next Friday. A quick timeline from 2019. Like I said, in fall of 2018, we received the EMG study and began studying it, reading over it, and trying to figure out how we can develop a strategy to apply for these projects. January and February of last year, prepared statements of interest for 15 projects at 8 different school locations. The MSBA then reviewed those statements of interest and awarded the district 8 projects at 6 schools, and those are the ones that we referred to earlier. May and June of 2019, we prepared the prerequisites that the program required and submitted those to the MSBA. In August of 2019, the City Council took a vote to fund a loan order of just over $300,000 to fund the schematic design of these projects. In October of 2019, the MSBA assigned from a pre-selected list of designers and project managers, assigned our designer and project manager to us. There's an advantage here. We were assigned the same designer and project manager for all 6 of the projects, so we don't need to be chasing 8 different designers and 8 project managers, so that's been great. They've been good to work with. Those are CGKV Architects out of Cambridge and Left Field LLC out of somewhere on the North Shore, I think. So detailed design has been underway on these. Next week, the 4 standalone boiler projects are expected to be invited for the sort of the final acceptance for construction. The City Council is taking a vote next week to fund the loan order on these projects, which is $13.6 million. Let's see here. Moving forward, this is just an overview of the timeline I went over for your reading pleasure. The 2019 process, so where we're at right now, so went over that. The detailed design continues on the schools that have roof projects as well. The design is more involved with those projects, and so those will be submitted and ultimately expected to be accepted by the MSBA and then moved forward on their program at the April board meeting. So all 8 of these projects are currently moving on an aggressive timeline to get done during the 2020 construction season. We would expect, if we are lucky enough to have any more projects awarded next year, that we would do the same thing and meet another 1-year turnaround. So this has been a big undertaking by our team, the schools teams. Rick Underwood has been a real big help. Our Lands and Buildings has been a big help. Let's see here. It should be noted that almost 79% of the costs for these projects will be reimbursed through state grants. If we look on the next slide, this gives us a breakdown of the total of each of these projects. So these are the kind of the final numbers that the MSBA will be reviewing. So we're going to be spending $3.5 million to get a $10 million grant. It's a really great value on our money here. And then looking ahead, so currently, like I said, one of the sort of the main thing I'm working on right now is another 21 applications across 14 different school sites. 6 schools that we applied for last year that we were not rewarded or awarded, either a boiler, a roof, or a combination of both. We're going to reapply for those, and then 8 new school locations, and this includes the Bartlett, the Butler, the McAvenue, the Moody, the Merkland, the Robinson, the Shaughnessy, and the Wang schools. And so tonight, before you are 14 individual votes, and we are hoping that you will be supportive of them. We're going after an aggressive application schedule, and we hope that we can get money from the state to help us, keep our facilities in good condition. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Sure, any questions, Chairman Hoey,
The chairman, my friend.
from the facilities?
But thank you, Mayor. I seen a legal notice in the Lowell Sun, I believe, for that 13.6 million. What is that, when they go out to bond it?
Yeah, so it'll go out to bond. So there was a first reading last week at the city council, and then this coming Tuesday is when they'll actually have a public hearing for this vote.
And I'd like to say this one comment. You mentioned a few names, Rick Underwood, people that helped. I've been to Boston a few times watching our city manager work the crowd down there. That's who should be getting a pat on the back for what's happened in the past couple of years about all our new school and the maintenance and everything. She's done a bang-up job, so thank you, city manager. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. McGee.
Yes, thank you for your partnership. It's been a great collaboration with the city. We appreciate it.
Sure, of course. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Mr. Superintendent, on to 7.3.
Thank you. Kind of want to remind the committee of Committee Member Doherty's message about the intervention and intensive support when needed. We're really excited to continue to share with you the evolving approach of the Renaissance Network, which is our differentiated approach to supporting our chronically underperforming schools. This is, I believe, update 3, which you'll continue to receive updates as we develop and build this out. Also want to give some awareness to the committee and broader community as we think about this next budget cycle, as we talk about moving our dollars to a school-based budgeting process. We also will have a need for our chronically underperforming schools to intensively support them from, as I think Ms. Doherty called it, intensive intervention team. I think that was with the, I'm trying to use the language there, in certain cases. This is that type of case. 7 schools that have been chronically underperforming within this city. Dr. Guillory will name those schools, but I think all of you know those schools in the back of your mind. As I say it out to our community in conversation, everybody knows these schools because these 7 schools have been performing at a level in need of intensive support for some time, beyond any student group, beyond any teacher group, beyond any leadership configuration. We're seeing early progress. One of our principals is here, Ms. Dowling, to share a little bit about what that support looks like, and I'm excited to, that Dr. Guillory is going to have a chance to introduce to you a core team member who Ms. Dumont referenced as being an intense need within the district. So I appreciate the commercial preview, Ms. Dumont, who announced her address for the community, also neighbor Dumont. Really appreciate it. Dr. Guillory.
Thank you, Dr. Board, and to the school committee tonight. I do want to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Dowling for being here tonight. I will call her up momentarily, but I also want to acknowledge Mr. Osorio, if you'd please stand. This is Abraham Osorio. This is our new school climate specialist. That's the position that you all approved back in August or September or so, and so we brought him on board. He's hit the ground running, working very intensively in our schools, one school in particular, as we speak. So he has very strong skill sets with working with kids through restorative practices, but also has the ability to help do some root cause analysis with students. He's going to be working with staff as well, and also looking to develop out some of our intensive support programs in the curriculum that will be used to educate our students, lifting their voices as well. So we're excited to have him on board with us. So thank you again, Mr. Osorio, for being here.
Sure.
Microphone, Abraham.
Mr. Mayor, Dr. Boyd, cabinet members, school committee members, and student member. Good evening, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys. I'm excited about the opportunity ahead, and look forward to working with everyone involved to get this work done. It's beautiful work and exciting work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I could, as a point of privilege, the committee knows full well my real excitement about being able to have lunch with our children. Today happened to be my day to make my way around our middle schools, finding my way into cafeterias, just an opportunity to engage with young people. And I was really just excited to see on his third day on the job when I went to have lunch with our middle schoolers at the Sullivan Middle School, who happened to be there engaging with our young people and introducing himself to our students. So thank you, Abraham, for that work. Thank you for your commitment to our children, and welcome to Lowell. Our children are going to benefit from the support you provide.
Thank you. The privilege is mine.
Happens all the time.
Trick mic for you. So again, we'll jump right into the presentation. For our experienced committee members, these first two slides you're familiar with, you've seen them before. Just again to orient our new team members that we've designated, as Dr. Boyd said, are chronically underperforming schools. We've put them into a network together, and we're calling them the Renaissance Network. And the idea is...
Until committee member Martin submits that better name, I want to continue to recognize that.
So what we are providing our schools is certainly differentiated supports to help them close achievement and performance gaps to address those. And schools are in this network based on their DESE accountability status. So in this slide, you'll see our schools by name that are here, and we're looking at, again, the performance, the accountability percentile. Those below the 10th percentile are those that are working with the state or have turnaround plans, and we do have two schools, Lowell High as well as the Stock LOSA, that have low-performing subgroups. So they, too, also have a state turnaround plan, and the green out we've included in this group as well because they were recently involved with the state plan, and so we want to continue providing them supports as we recognize a transition takes a period of time.
So as a point of clarity for our new committee members, this data is at the conclusion of the school year. So 2019 doesn't refer to December 2019, it's June 2019 from last school year.
Sure, Mr. Superintendent. Before we move on, could you just explain the no, mine's on. Could you just, for people at home and for the new people like myself, what's the color code? What do the numbers mean?
Yeah, so you'll see within the color code as Dr. Guillory gets himself resituated with the feedback from the mic, green suggests improvement, yellow suggests stagnation, red suggests decline. These are the two overarching data figures that are produced by the state. So when you see chronic underperformance, you're seeing a number there that's low from 2 years ago, and then in many cases declines last year. The number to the right is probably the easiest to understand without going into a lot about the accountability system. That's to suggest that if you are a low number means that you're in the bottom performing schools statewide when looking at the state accountability system. So the second percentile, the challenge that we've charged Ms. Dowling with leading, means that currently the Robinson School is outperformed by 98% of similar schools statewide. It's in the bottom 2% of schools statewide, and you can read those numbers up. So you want the bigger number. This is not a case of first place being number one. This more so think about it in terms of your school homework assignments. You want the 100%. So, Mr. Mayor, does that answer your question?
Honestly, not really. So, like the Bartlett, and I look at the Bartlett and I look at the Robinson.
Yes.
So why is the Bartlett there if it seems high?
Okay, so the numbers there, none of those are high. So actually what you're looking at high might be going closer to 100, actually in the 10th percentile and down is automatically identified by the state, bottom 10% of schools overall. You'll see some schools that are above the 10th percentile. In those cases, it's because individual student groups within the school have been identified, meaning significant gaps in performance, which is the case at the Stocklosa Lowell High School. You also see that the Lowell Stocklosa, as we've recognized here on this floor, has done some incredible work and improved over time, but these designations include multiple year scores. So if they have another year of significant improvement next year, it'll weigh heavily within their performance. So you may recall, and I'm not sure if that presentation was with the current sitting committee or the prior, but Mr. Cardesi came in and shared a lot about the work that was leading to that progress at the Stocklosa. If you look on the left, those numbers that are looking higher, that's about the progress that they're making towards improvement. So that's not a same percentile score. That's a combination of essentially points earned. So there's certain targets within, and you see there where it's red, that means less progress than the prior year. So that's not a percentile number. The one on the right is the out of 100, easier to understand without us digging into the actual accountability reports. But in terms of coding, the reason you can see the left is helpful is you can see that while the number, like in the case of the Bartlett, might have stayed stagnant overall in terms of a percentile ranking, you can see that there was less progress, coding red, year over year. Progress still made. Our schools are still making incredible progress. This is a question about how much progress is being made in comparison with similar schools. So I want to make sure I'm also recognizing there's still extremely important and hard work, as Ms. Dowling will share, a lot of hard work for her to get to that 21 number. We've got some more supports that are needed, more resources that are needed so we can accelerate that work. Those numbers aren't zeros. Those numbers just happen to be lower than what we want them to be and lower than some of our other schools across the district. Does that help further, Mr. Mayor, or can I?
It helps, but I can go over this after with you.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Sure. Ms.
Just for
Martin.
my own understanding too. So looking at that, would it be appropriate to kind of compare that progress towards improvement towards what we used to receive as kind of our growth numbers, which may not necessarily have been tied to achievement levels, but were tied to the growth over year that we could look at for each student population or whatnot? Is that,
yeah, it's
should
part
I
of
correlate
it.
that?
There's the state shifted its accountability work overall, so now they give us a progress towards goals, progress numbers. That's in there as part of it.
Okay.
If you click on the DESE profile for each of our schools, now what you'll see is almost a quadrant of sorts, a box that has a multitude of numbers. These are just two selected numbers for sake of brevity here. We will actually be providing into you at a later time. You'll hear from our Director of Accountability that'll share with you a more in-depth view of what the accountability system looks like once we get that accountability data for this next year. And I'm imagining the committee's used to receiving those types of presentations for years past. So this is just a snapshot of those numbers, selected numbers to try to ease communication here. So it's kind of a yes and, Committee Member Martin. It's definitely included within, and to be honest with you, personally, I look at those growth percentiles myself as a big indicator as within.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey.
Thank you, Mayor. I know the middle schools, I've been following the whole state. I watch, like, the city of Lynn right now, they're having major problems with vaping. It's just one issue, but they're having a major problem. I looked a couple years ago, I'm not sure if you can do this, Superintendent, but we kept our fourth graders back. I think it was last year or the year before, and made them do the fifth grade at the Riley and the fifth grade at the Moody. I'd like to know if we could maybe follow them, two groups of children, to see how they're doing, if that's possible, especially for data. I'd like to see how they are doing in middle school where they were kept back that one year, because I still have a real concern about 10-year-olds being in middle schools, and I think for the new committee members and myself, it would be good if we could see some data on that, if that's possible.
It's definitely possible if you're okay with one disclaimer. If you're okay with us not selecting out the kids that are new to the district and just following the grade as a cohort, we can do that. If you want it to be more disaggregated, to be only the children who were involved in that decision, that might be a little bit more nuanced. We could do it, it's just going to be more resource intensive. So if you could, and you don't have to answer now, Mr. Hoey, but if we can talk a little bit further about what you want to accomplish, and we can tackle it in any number of ways, some easier, some harder.
And I can find that out myself, because I do know a lot of the children and their parents. I could just ask them personally to see. I just have a concern about middle schools. And I did like that, but we had to cut a lot of things at one time before you got here, and that's something I wish we didn't cut, but we did. Thank you.
Any questions on this side? You guys are very quiet. Okay, Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you. Thank you. So one portion that I would like to highlight and reorient is that we launched our instructional rounds last November, again, within our Renaissance schools. And we have actually done 2 sets, both a November school visit and a January school visit in 5 of the 7 schools. So the very next slide I'll show you will have 5 schools worth of data versus the 7. So I was deliberate in excluding 2 because we hadn't done those rounds at the time of this publication. But since November, well, since last Friday, as a part of our instructional rounds, we've done 182 classroom visits. And those teams comprised of central office members, school team members, LSAA members, UTL members, and they are named in terms of math coach, actually classroom teachers, lead teachers, the building principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches, literacy specialists, and again, central office team members. And again, the idea of an instructional round is that a team gets together, we go into the school, we talk to the principal and the school team, and we hear what they've been working on. We use a rubric, and I have an excerpt of the rubric that we use. We look at the practices that the school has been working on, and we go around and we just collect evidence. This is non-evaluative evidence, but the idea is for us to look at what has the school been working on, and do we see evidence of the progress of that across the school. We then provide the school's reports back. We have a very intense debrief session where we discuss what we've seen real time, and then we take that information, we provide it back to the schools. And then Ms. Dowling, I'll call her up now to share her experiences a little bit. But I've included 2 teacher quotes because these were very powerful at one of our most recent visits. And I'll read them here for you. As a teacher, I've often wondered what happened in these meetings. This was a helpful and valuable experience. Another teacher stated, I've gained valuable insight on how to improve my practice. It is helpful for me to see the work of my colleagues. So again, the idea is that this process of looking at practice, examining practices, visiting classrooms, our schools are now starting to institute this on their own, and they are doing these mini rounds within. So if they're working on a particular concept or they've had professional development on that, then they then go and inspect for the work that they've been doing and give themselves feedback or timely feedback on that. So I invite Ms. Dowling, the principal of Robinson Middle School, to share some of her experiences as a Renaissance Network member.
Thank you. So when we had our instructional rounds, I think the most valuable piece that came out of it is we have, according to our turnaround plan, we have our certain look-fors that we've developed with the staff. When we go into classrooms, what are we looking for? And the team was able to give us feedback on specifically those pieces as well. So we could see how classes are progressing towards there, and also ideas on tracking that data and focusing more what we are asking teachers to do so that it's more achievable. And so we've been able to give teachers real-time feedback. We've been able to give them whole school data on our turnaround practices and our goals and where we're at with them. The curriculum team has worked with us on next steps, and they've been out in the building working with our teachers on planning and PLCs and implementation of lessons in the classroom. They've been working with our coaches on supporting our teachers with that, with these goals, and it's really just helped us to really focus on what we're doing. The outcome has been, if I could share a little bit of data, we've had some good news. So our second term Our MSV, we're halfway through the process. We have our second day tomorrow. But our observation showed an increase in several areas. Climate, behavior management, productivity, analysis, and inquiry all had increases, and there were no significant decreases. As well as at we started our iReady map testing. We're done 2 grades with math, and we've already shown a 15% growth since November. So these pieces are working. They're showing growth. Teachers are implementing strategies in their lessons. With that, our attendance team, we've made 4%. We've decreased chronic absenteeism by 4% since first term. And since our numbers right now are 4% lower than they were last year at this time. So we're really, we're increasing engagement in the classroom by being able to focus our instruction with the support of the curriculum team and the instructional rounds with Dr. Guillory. So.
Thank you, Ms. Dowling. So our next slide here. Any questions for Ms. Dowling?
I just have one. Sorry, I've missed some of your meetings in the past couple of months, but I'd like to hear from you because I know how hard you've worked at that school. How are you doing?
Great. I'm not a great public speaker, but...
It's okay. I'm just saying, I know what you're up against. And it's been a while now, so you feel like the cavalry's on its way and people are helping you?
It's been wonderful. Yes. The support has been amazing. I'm not alone in this at all. We have people in the building constantly, and I said that since I arrived. Come out on Friday afternoons at 1 o'clock. Come out on Monday mornings at 8 o'clock. It's just as exciting. So, but we love the kids, and they're making such progress. The building feels so wonderful right now. It feels like a great place to be, honestly, and that's the start of good things to come. So.
One last question. How you been doing with subs? I know a lot of times you're shy some numbers for substitutes for maybe.
We have been very lucky. We've been hit with the flu this week, our staff. But generally speaking, our staff attendance has been amazing this year. So maybe 2 or 3 out a day, versus a year ago we had significantly higher numbers, which is that's also a reflection on the work of the Renaissance Network, because that's the teachers are not as stressed, and they have told me that they're not as stressed coming to work. It's a place where they enjoy coming in the morning, and we're making great gains. We had a little celebration today for some of our data, so, and they were they needed that in February. You need that, so.
Well, that's great to hear because that's an issue that bothered me too. I already brought it up tonight where we had 58 teachers out one day, May 15th at the high school. That didn't bother me because I know there's 300 or 400 teachers, so it can happen. But when you're 17 subs shy, that bothered me. So thank you. I'm glad to hear things are rolling for you. Good.
Ms. Doherty?
Thank you. It's really very exciting to hear such positive data coming around in such a short time. And I guess my question is really to how the feedback is given to teachers, because from my perspective, it's got to be somewhat stressful for a teacher to have a team of people come in, central office, the building principal, watching them teach, right? So that's, I know from my days as an adjunct professor, that was part of our review, is you'd have the department chair sitting in the back of the room, and all teachers have to go through it as part of the evaluation. And I know this is not an evaluation process, but it still has to be stressful. So I guess it's like a two-pronged. Are we giving individual feedback to our teachers? And wouldn't that, you're shaking your head no, wouldn't that be most helpful? And how are we giving the feedback? Your quote here, I wondered what happens in these meetings. It was helpful. What is that teacher referring to? What meeting?
So I'll take 2 of those, and Ms. Dowling can talk about that more specifically. So that quote was referring to the debrief meeting after the visit. So the teacher was able to hear, and I think it was affirming that the teacher didn't hear us in there talking about individual teachers. We were talking about patterns across the school. And so the idea is not to give individual feedback at all. but to give sort of trends of what we're seeing, the growth in areas that we're seeing, and in areas where we're not seeing the growth, given that feedback so the school can then determine what its next steps are.
So just to clarify, the debrief meeting is the team that has come in and watched the teacher, providing the whole school with feedback about what they saw.
Well, we're talking as the team, not the whole school.
Yes, yeah, and not individual teachers. Got it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so then the feedback, then the report is actually shared with the building leaders, and then they share that out with their ILT. It makes its way to the school as a whole, or they take the areas that they'd like to focus in on.
If I could, to illustrate a more vivid picture for the millions and millions watching worldwide, there is, as you heard, and again, I appreciate Ms. Dumont with kind of the commercial preview, the process and the practice of teaching is becoming more and more complex. So you're very right, Committee Member Doherty, that change in practice and the complexity of practice also changes the way that we view teaching and the process of supporting teachers, as Ms. Dumont was sharing. So it can be, in some ways, anxiety-inducing when now we're transitioning from a practice that a generation ago was a very private practice to now one that needs to be a very public practice because we're all learning together. The Renaissance Network is a learning network where we're all supporting one another, learning together how we do this very complex work differently. So the more vivid illustration would be this. It's referred to as instructional rounds. We didn't create this process. This is a well-researched process that actually originated out of Harvard University, modeled on medical rounds. So if anybody's watched reality television about the teaching hospitals or even some of the dramas that are out there, House, I think comes to mind for people that have watched that, where there's a group of learning doctors that are observing medical practice in play, some complex operational procedures, and then debriefing the symptoms and learning together about how to improve, in some cases making recommendations to the practicing doctor about what those symptoms might suggest and what might happen as a result of thinking about things differently. That's kind of been commonplace within teaching hospitals, within the medical profession, and I believe everybody knows the United States of America has the top hospitals in the world, and Massachusetts has the top hospitals within the United States. So hospitals and medicine is something we know very well as a country. So this research was based on how do we learn from those things that we've done very well and apply them to an industry that's, as education, that's becoming rapidly complex, that doesn't have a recipe for success, and how do we apply what's worked in one industry to the other? And that was the development of the instructional rounds. Modeled on it looks different. So what we're understanding and what we can understand is you can't understand how to improve one teacher with a short snapshot visit. But what you can learn is over the course of many snapshot visits, you gather several hours of data on the school, which then helps Ms. Dowling and her team to think about the overarching support provided across the school, the trends in needs, so that she can think differently perhaps about resources or professional development, so that we can all learn together, which then again is important to highlight, again, very right, Committee Member Doherty, non-evaluative process. This is about learning and improving our practice together. And again, you'll note just one aspect of this learning network and support network that we're working to create, because while this is very helpful to a principal such as Ms. Dowling, who's working in a highly high needs environment, we don't target in this type of intensive support for every school. This is targeted intensive support in the areas where that support is needed most, hence the Renaissance Network.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Dakota?
I would just like to commend the Robinson for the successes that you're reaping recently, and that's great to hear. And we give kudos to the staff that are working for you, but let's not forget the leadership that she presents to those people every single day. I know that when we have gone into that school to visit and so forth, she's never in her office. Just saying. You know, that's a big telling story in my book. And as a teacher, having a principal who's never in their office, which is can be disconcerting, I suppose, in some cases, but she's out there. She's out there working with her teachers and working with the kids. I think that that is proving to be a successful formula for the Robinson. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoey?
One last thing about middle schools. I've been focusing on the Sullivan School for years. I look at things a little bit different than a lot of people do. I look at, everybody will say to me I should call Liam Skinner because he's the best. I do call Liam Skinner. Over the years, I've called him many times. A lot of times he tells me I'm right about discipline, a dean of discipline. But I believe, like, I've never voted for alternative schools. I never did. For the past 25 years, I voted against them because I always felt that when you have problems inside a certain school, they should be fixed in that school. I don't know if it's legal to get a different classroom or 2 classrooms in a school. And if there's 3 kids in a class like me, I used to upset the class really bad, but they'd take me out and give me the ruler. You know, that's what they did in the other century. But my point is, I believe what they need is a boot in the butt and a hug, all at the same time. We allow troublemakers to play basketball, you know, when they should be in an alternative school. If they cry, oh, you can't keep me from the basketball team, they'll let them play. I can tell you stories, and I don't want to waste our time tonight on it, but is it illegal to separate children from a classroom that need that extra help?
I'm appreciating all of the commercial interruptions. I appreciate the hyperbole. We don't use the boot and the hug necessarily, but I think I get the symbolism of where you're going. Definitely within-school support is the way to go, and you're going to hear Dr. Guillory as he continues to talk about the intensive support within-school environments that we're working to pilot this year. As well, just as a reminder to the community, we're working to do this right. So working alongside our principals, our teachers, to pilot, to start slow, and to then accelerate the investment in the support. So you're going to hear Dr. Guillory talk a little bit about some pilot work about these within-school environments for kids like yourself and myself that might need some intensive support within the school structure. Dr. Guillory, do you mind, Mr. Hoey, if you...
I just want to add just one last thing. When I look at the daily school, let's say, and I look at the Sullivan School, 2 that I focus on a lot, I look at the demographics. That's what I look at. If you look at that board of all the schools that are not performing, not one of them, I don't believe one of them, is in the Highlands. And we have a lot of Southeast Asians inside the daily school. I'm not knocking Liam Skinner. He's probably the best principal in the state. He's very good, I know that. Discipline is always the thing he told me. You have to get control of it. If you don't, you'll never get control of your school. I hear a lot of talk about, oh, we can't suspend children. I got to say this, Mr. Guillory, since you've been here, I've given your number out about 4 times. I like that type of thing, that I could take a phone call and say, here, call this guy. And it's been over some pretty serious things, you know, vaping and violence. And then this Miss Canty, I have to say this, because we never talk about some of our lawyers that work in the school system. I went and visited her the other day just to thank her for what she did for a child that was in trouble. You know, if your child hits somebody or does something wrong, you get really scared. And this woman gave a great effort, Mrs. Canty, I hope I'm saying her name right. I did go in her office and thanked her myself personally. But Dr. Guillory, since you've been here, you've helped me out quite a bit. I'm really excited about you and Desmond. I can't wait to get going. I really can't. So again, I hope we keep you here for a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah. Please continue.
Thank you. So this slide just depicts the progress that we are seeing overall in our schools. So again, we're looking at the set of rounds that was done in November. This data only represents 5 schools. Sullivan and Lowell High are not in here because we hadn't done their rounds at the time of this publication. So in looking at the rubric that I mentioned earlier, in the areas of school climate or classroom climate, school climate, learning objectives, and classroom, the learning time, how lessons are structured. What we noticed in January and November, you'll see the number of classrooms that were coded in those particular areas. So sustaining is sort of the highest level, providing is your middle level, and developing would be your lower level. What's not represented here is not observed. If we didn't capture data for a particular classroom, we did capture it in the not observed category. But what you see is that in visiting those same 5 schools in January, that the number of classrooms went from 1 to 10 in sustaining. So we noticed again an increase in the number of classrooms performing at a higher level. Providing remained consistent, and then we saw a decrease in the number of classrooms that were coded as developing. Similarly, for learning objectives,
That's what you wanted, Dr. Gillard,
that's
right?
that's absolutely what we wanted. And learning objectives, again, we see an increase from January to November in sustaining, meaning that either the learning objectives, the quality of them are there, the teachers explaining those to the students, and the students are able to articulate what they are learning. Again, in providing, we see it's holding the line, which again is this is a good bar. This is what you want your classrooms at least providing, and then in most cases when they're sustaining, that's at the highest level of performance. And again, we see a decrease in developing. Again, it's a nice trend to see there. And again, learning time. So what's actually happening, or how are teachers structuring classroom learning time? Again, we see an increase in sustaining. We see an increase in providing in this category. And again, a decrease in developing. And again, building the practice of what happens when we leave. Again, we see that schools are starting this idea of peer observations, where they are modeling now. They're taking the rubrics that we're using, and they're doing this on their own. So if I've been working on writing quality learning objectives for professional development, the teachers get the training on that as a whole school, and then the school themselves do many rounds where they go in and check on this or inspect it for progress. And we're seeing schools utilize this across the board.
Can I just jump in? One quick question. I know we have to go to executive session after this, but when you go to the, you got the organization of the classroom climate, but then you have the learning objectives. The sustaining, shouldn't that number be higher, the 1 to 4? The way you explained it is if the kids are getting what the teacher presents. So am I misunderstanding something?
You're understanding it, Mr. Mayor. You want to see, basically, you want to see a decrease in the lower and an increase in the upper. But this takes time. So it's a learning process. So we're seeing progress. If we actually saw a significant and drastic improvement from November to January, we might even start to question the data and the reliability of the data. So what you see is you see improvement over time. It's hard and steady work over time. You'll see incremental progress month to month, so that at the end of the year, you'll see the measurable progress, and then it's going to take a series of years before we start to see this process of turnaround, meaning going from a chronic underperformance to high performance take hold. This community experienced that with the Merkland School, and you may remember how long that process took there to get to a place of sustainable improvement. So this is just over the course of a matter of a couple of months. You are right, the upper end is lower than where we want it to be, but it's also in some ways expected because these are schools that have needed some intense support over time. So progress we're seeing, which is what we want to note.
Okay. The climate really jumped for the sustaining, but the learning objectives just seemed a little low to me. I just thought that might be a little higher for you, but okay.
Your observation's accurate.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
So as in looking at these, so the numbers don't necessarily jibe. Are there classrooms that just got hit the first time and haven't been hit the second time? Okay.
Yep, so it's not a one-to-one correspondence.
Okay.
We didn't go to the exact same classrooms the second time.
Okay, but within the same schools?
It's within the same schools.
Okay. And then the indicators you're providing us with, so these are just your examples?
Examples.
There's a whole
There's a list of
litany
10 that we...
Okay.
Yep.
And just for my own edification, so to the mayor's point, the classroom learning objectives, I'm assuming that's what you're basically judging against is, you know, the learning objective for the day is posted, and it's the kind of sheltered instruction thing where you've got a number of different, okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Yeah. Please continue.
And what's next? So the idea here is what are we doing to invest in our future? Again, we're talking about intensive supports for our schools that have been struggling for many years. We're looking at 5 guiding pillars of support for our Renaissance Network schools, as well as for our Renaissance Network schools. So improving academics, strategic interventions, non-instructional supports, extended learning time, and engaging families. And what I tried to articulate on the side here is improving academics. As Dr. Boyd mentioned, we've launched in with instructional rounds. We're going to be talking about bringing forth recommendations about what do we do next to take this and accelerate this, improving academics and closing achievement gaps for our students. And looking at our strategic interventions, Mr. Hoy and Ms. Daugherty asked about strategic interventions. Again, the Renaissance Network itself being an intervention, but when you start talking about individual classrooms, one of the things that we're piloting right now at the Green Alge is this idea of a help zone for students. So for students that may be struggling in classrooms, how do we pull that student out for a period of time, get them to reflect on their behaviors, work with them through some form of curriculum, and then re-enter them or get them to re-engage in the classroom. So we're at the very early stages of doing that type of program. So the idea is the more that we can keep our kids in school, the more that we can keep them engaged, the more that we can help them process or get to the root causes of what's causing them to mushroom or present disruptive behaviors or interrupted behaviors, then we can treat those and then get them back. So it's the idea of these dosages that we want to support our students in this way. And you all met our school climate specialist tonight, and then we will also be bringing forth ideas for extended learning time and engaging families. But again, significant investments are what we're talking about for our schools in terms of helping them improve. This is not going to be an overnight fix, but it will take us really buckling down and being committed to supporting these groups.
What you're seeing, committee members, is the results of a very small amount of investment. If you recall from the budget adjustment that we undertook together in August and the resources that came forward, so a small investment in a small amount of time. As we start to get into our strategic plan over the course of multiple years and we start to get into a full budgeting process, these are the types of conversations that we'll be engaging in to see which direction the committee would like to go. We'll continue to bring you these updates as we go. My expectation is that nothing we have a discussion about during the budget process will be new to this committee or new to this community. Yield the floor for questions.
Sure, Ms. Daugherty.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't want to delay it. I know we've got a full agenda still to get through. Quick question. The school climate specialist. So you've got a team of people coming in, observing classrooms, providing feedback, the debrief and all that. How does the school climate specialist fit into that?
So the school climate specialist, we will focus more on looking at when we start really studying or unpacking our climate behavior, our suspensions, all of those aspects, what's going on that's interrupting learning in schools. That's where we will focus that. So it's the instructional piece, that team, we're looking solely at instruction. When we start talking about our climate aspects of it, how do we really engage our students in ways that help them give voice to them? Many of our students, as Dr. Boyd mentioned, being at the Sullivan today and talking with students, they want their voices to be heard. They have ideas of how their school should be run, but not necessarily, we don't always have their voices presented or their voice doesn't show up in the direction that we're going. So we expect our school climate manager to work very intensely with those groups. Our students that are having more challenges in school, how then do we support those students with a vibrant curriculum that the Office of Teaching and Learning, our Chief Academic Officer, there's work that's happening on that side. So then we focus on the implementation of that. So it's a multitude of things that he's going to be working on, and we will be bringing forth recommendations for additional resources around those areas as well, because one person, it's a lot for one person to tackle, but we will be very intentional about supporting these schools that have high footprints. I mean, it's obvious that the suspensions are high. So how do we then attack those? What's going on if a kid is getting constantly suspended or getting in trouble for disrespect? How do we then help them process and work through those challenges?
Thank you. Mr. Dillon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just, is there an element to the instructional rounds where maybe staff from the underperforming school are doing rounds at another school, or basically the opposite way? Does that happen both ways, or is it more of underperforming schools are having the visitors come to them? You know what I mean? Are we doing visits both ways, or?
So we've not launched that, but as part of our Renaissance Network, we also have mentor principals in there, and that will become part of our process. We just haven't turned that switch on as of yet. So we actually, that's part of the conversation that I've been having with our lead principal that's supporting the network as well.
Okay, thank you.
That's a very good point. Do you think that would be established soon, something like that? Okay, thank you. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All
Sorry,
right.
Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Okay, so no further discussion, we'll get, what? Oh, yeah. No, you can, go ahead. Are you all set? Yeah. Okay, all right. Reports on motions. Motion response 3.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report of motions within the 2 reports that are updated within the table are disaggregated out and delineated within the agenda as requested by the committee. You will notice there are responses to 2 motions that were brought by Committee Member Doherty, staff evaluations and status on outdoor play spaces, both delineated within the agenda because those are new reports that are included within the table.
Sure. Mr. Hardy, any questions? Oh, sorry, Ms. Martin.
Mine actually is not on that, on those 2 motions, but on, I believe it's number 4 on the report on motions, and this was regarding the school site council. I believe Dr. Guillory had provided that in terms of the training plan for the school site councils. As I was looking at it, it looked like we've received funding or support to do that at 5 of our school locations. Is that accurate? So what, I guess the obvious next question, what happens at all the other schools that are launching this new way of being for their school site councils, but aren't necessarily getting the support of this training opportunity?
I believe that's coming through. Ms. Phillips, you want to share a little bit about the support for school site councils and the work that's happening around site-based budgeting specifically? I believe you're referencing, Ms. Martin? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, school committee members, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Superintendent. So at the most recent leadership professional development, we had a presentation, a training on the requirements for the school site council. The first step was around getting the correct composition and following the correct process to ensure that the site councils have the principal as the leader, but also teachers, parents, community members, and students if you're a high school. So we had a lot of discussion around the expectation of the law as well as the goal, especially with site-based budgeting and decision-making. So our next step is for each school to put into place its council. And then we also will be providing information on fair student funding and how to undergo that process, that decision-making process. We've also provided opportunities for technical assistance around sensitivity training, right? We have a lot of different positions on that council, so if that's support that a school needs, that's something that we can help to coordinate. Also, we've encouraged all of our site councils to be reminded of diverse representation on the council, especially as relates to the students that are served. Our councils should ideally represent the student body, but the starting point is in the recruitment and ensuring that we're getting the information out to all of our diverse groups, that this decision-making council is in place. So within the next 2 to 3 weeks, each site council should be sharing out information. We also are partnering with our citywide family council on making sure that families know the opportunities that are available. We're also partnering, I see Mickey in the back, our UTL partners, to ensure that our teachers are also aware of the opportunities on our different site councils. So in the next 2 to 3 weeks, by the end of February, our expectation is that every school will have a site council in place, and that they've identified any additional supports that they need to be successful through the site-based decision-making process.
So the difference between what you've just described and what these five specific schools will be getting?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, that's my question. So what's the difference between
Right.
your broad approach that you've just described and versus what's specifically referenced here as 5 specific schools?
Sure. So the 5 schools already opted in for support. The other schools have to identify where they need support. So they're not in a program of, 5 different meetings where we're going to sit and talk about how to improve your council. Those who were in the pilot actually had a schedule of meeting and tasks to strengthen their council. They opted into it.
Okay, any questions on your motions? Ms. Doherty?
Thank you. Are we on to the
Yeah, we're just
reports then?
bundling everything. We got to get the executive session.
I know.
So
Are we on to the
yeah,
evaluation
we're on
report?
motions and your motions.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go right to the evaluation report. So as we saw, it's a partial report, and I would say that it is very partial because it's not really addressing a lot of the specifics I'd asked for. So one thing it does mention that I think is very important, the custodians, the expectation that we will be evaluating custodians in the fall of 2020, and also mention the administrative assistants, which I'm assuming you mean the clerical group by that, right, will be fall of 2020. What isn't mentioned, however, that is very important to me are the paraprofessional evaluations. So I'm hoping that that's also going to be on track to be to have a tool in place to be able to implement evaluations on paraprofessionals beginning in the fall of 2020, that school year is when everybody's in place and understands we are now evaluating our staff. One of the things that also wasn't mentioned that came out, for me, I didn't realize it when I first made the motion, that there are many people, the unaffiliated, which are also not being evaluated. And I think we need to, as a district, we're like the oldest co-ed public high school in the country. We should be evaluating every single one of our employees. And it's not meant in any way as a punitive thing. I think it benefits both the staff person and the manager to have a robust and fair evaluation system in place. It's just like we wouldn't just pass kids through a whole school year without telling them how they're doing in their reading and their math and what are the areas they need to improve, or give them an A++ with a star on it when they're doing a fantastic job. It's something we need to be doing as a district. My other concern, so I'm really looking forward to getting this more comprehensive report, which I think is important for us as a district in moving forward in our mutually shared goals. But I did get, last week, I was reached out regarding this report, and I got some conflicting information regarding central office evaluations, and the superintendent knows we met briefly before this meeting tonight, particularly the top-tier evaluations that were conducted during last year and subsequent raises that happened. So I'm requesting to make sure that the upcoming report includes details, steps, process, timeline regarding those specific evaluations that I had conflicting information about. Now, I don't know if we need that as a formal motion, or I can just say, I need this on top of that. Whatever the wish of the body, if you want me to make it as a formal motion.
I'll take it as my directive to staff. I'll get you the information that you need. No need for a motion.
Great, okay. So I think we're on track to make some really significant moves as a district that, you know, should have happened a long time ago. I know there's some conflict with negotiating with our unions about this, but I would, you know, stand up and say every employee deserves to be evaluated in a fair, transparent process that works for everybody. It's good for the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoey?
I know we're in a rush for time because I have a lot I'd like to say about this. I just think we're not looking at a lot of things, meaning who's going to do all these evaluations, how much is it going to cost us. I look at us as the school committee, and since I've been here for a few years, we haven't even evaluated a superintendent. I mean, the last one we evaluated was Dr. Kafawi on his first term. That's the last time I remember doing evaluations. So for us to be going around and telling people to evaluate cooks and janitors and everything else, I think we have to square ourselves away at the top. I don't think we did one person working in yeah, well, but I mean, I know we only do the superintendent, but I don't believe anybody's had an evaluation done in the administration since I've been sitting here, unless I missed something. I don't think we have. So I think there's a lot of questions. I don't want to get into too much tonight, but we have to look at this a little bit deeper.
Sure. Thank you. Yep. Any further discussion on that motion? Any questions on the playground equipment motion? Sure, Ms. Doherty?
Thank you. I noticed that Mr. Underwood isn't here, so I don't know if anybody can answer the questions. If you want to do a follow-up on this or delay it to the next one?
Spit it out.
Well, okay, so if you look on, when we have the breakdown, that of 29 school buildings, 12 have their own playground on site, right? So that leaves you 17. Out of the 17, 7 are schools that are near or next to an existing or city park. I'm not sure what those 7 are, because under the 9 schools that don't have any playground, the Sullivan is listed as not having a playground, but yet the Sullivan was also listed as being adjacent to a school that has a playground, to a park, a city park, and having a request for repairs. So I have some questions about the Sullivan. Plus, my understanding was the Bartlett was not close enough to a city park to be able to use it, because as you know, our kids have, what is it, 15 or 20 minutes, if that, for recess?
I think they do use it there, though.
I've been told they don't use it. Okay. So that's why
We'll get clarification on
I'm really looking for, like, if we have 7 parks that the city controls that are the only parks for those schools, what are those 7 parks, and can we put that front and center in front of the city to say, please, these are the parks that deserve your extra attention? The Rogers was not listed in the no playgrounds. The 9 schools that have no play, now maybe it was just left off, but the Rogers, the STEM Academy, it's got over 800 students, and my understanding is they don't have a playground. There might be some space that we could take over. So I just have questions regarding some of the data is confusing me. I love the pictures. That was a great addition. And I love the information telling us what has already been put before the city, if we could have this improvement, that improvement. These seem like minor steps that if we could make would make a huge difference. But as I said, when I had this motion, I think it's very important for equity that every school in the city, every child has the opportunity to play outside in an appropriate, safe space. And I'm sticking to that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say from up here that I was at the Bartlett today for the Reader Day. They do make use of the city park there. And I'm sure that they do with all the parks. I know with the new hires we've had on the city, that the playgrounds, and there's certain sections of the cities that are being cleaned up daily to make sure that it's safe for children. I know that's happening for a fact.
Excellent.
So we can get more reports. But what I was amazed at too is I read their third grade class, and the student government at the school, between the third and the fourth grades, I believe, they're starting a penny drive to buy playground equipment, as far as not slides, but balls, basketballs, kickballs, things like that, that they can use at recess. So on one hand, I'm very proud to see that they're taking the initiative. On the other hand, I'm kind of surprised that we don't have money to provide these things. So that's something that needs to be addressed immediately. Mr. Hardy?
If I could just add to that, I was also at the Bartlett Reader Day today. I read to a first grade class, and I had a student ask me, can we get a playground that we can go to? So maybe the older students can make it in time and the younger kids aren't. My understanding was that the area was too far away. But if they don't have playground equipment like balls and things like that, again, that's an equity issue that we have to make
Right,
sure
yeah,
that they all have
exactly
that.
right, and that's
Thank you. And that's kind of on
needs to be
us.
something that needs to be addressed immediately. Mr. Hoey?
Something you might be able to check on, Mayor, for me, the Cardinal O'Connor School, I watched them having recess outside in a small area. I was really impressed on how clean the school was around the fence and everything this year. I was really happy. This was just about a week ago. And I talked to some of the staff. I think that you might have an issue with people that live around the school and the staff, like parking and trucks being pulled up there. That's what I heard
Sure, we
from
can
some of the
check on
staff.
that.
So you might want to check on the Cardinal O'Connor School. It's a preschool.
Thank you. Any further, Ms. Clark? No. Okay.
If I could, Mr. Mayor,
Sure,
just to
Mr.
call your attention,
Superintendent.
the cover sheet does identify the STEM school. If you look to the cover memo, so the STEM school with and the playground or lack thereof is identified within the cover memo.
But then it's not on page 2, so maybe it was just left off like inadvertently. And when the schools are listed that don't have a playground, it's not listed there.
Okay,
unless I
so what's
missed
being provided here is all of the internal work product. So that document was Mr. Underwood's research to Dr. Hall, and then you see Dr. Hall's summary with additional data on the cover memo that he's submitting to me. So it was an opportunity or an idea of trying to be more comprehensive and providing you all of the internal work product. This is a significant amount of research on the part of the Mr. Underwood that was then back-checked by Dr. Hall.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Hoey?
just one last thing about the Rogers School. I did go there 4 different times in my life. It's almost impossible. They got a playground to the left side of the gymnasium, but everything's fenced up. You don't want the kids out in the common. It's not a good area to have them outside. But the Rogers School is huge. Underneath the building, there's a lot of land. I mean, I remember back in our days, just kicking a soccer ball around, which was a basketball at that time, and a basketball. There's a lot of room to do things inside that school. 800, I bet you we can handle that easy in that school.
Sure, thank
That's
you.
how I feel anyways.
All right. I just want to reiterate, though, that with the new hires, South Common is a hot spot, but it's being addressed daily over there, too, so, thank you. I need a motion to accept the reports of the superintendent, 7-1 through 7-4, as reports of progress by Ms. Martin, seconded by Ms. Doherty. New business, budget transfer, any questions? Ms. Martin?
Painful as it is, I'm sorry. But a $7,000 transfer into Lowell High School for rental of buildings? Are we renting a building? I didn't know what that would be.
Ms. Turner, can you provide detail?
I believe that's to make the graduation account full. Incentive rental of buildings, and it was more money this year than it was previously.
Okay, thank you very much. If that's not the case, let me know, but otherwise, thank you.
Do we know what the rental is for the graduation?
The actual cost?
Yeah.
No, I don't know that right now.
I'll guess at it, 27,000.
Okay.
I think it was 20 grand. I think it was 20 grand last time. That's what I believe, so if it's another
one
seven.
graduation event?
The college needs money. They need a lot of money.
Okay, but seriously, does anybody know what that, nobody knows?
I think
what
you
the
could
rental
put your
was
money
last
on what
year?
I just told you. I think
We can
paid
provide that
20.
back in a detailed report
Sure.
to the committee. Ms. Turner, if you can do that research and provide a report back to the committee.
Okay, all right. Mr. Dakota?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can tell you, I've been out of the high school for 5 years, and at that time, it was $17,000 to rent the Songus Arena. That was 5 years ago.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on the transfers? Where are we? Motion to approve, motion to approve the transfer budget 27,734.68 by Mr. Dillon, seconded by Mr. Dakota. Permission to, roll call, yep. Thank you.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Thank you. Permission to post career and innovation pathway specialist. Any questions? Okay, motion to, Ms. Doherty?
Sorry, I know, I just gotta, I feel compelled to say this, that for a minimum of 2 years' experience in the field of education, college advising and admission, school counseling, or related field in a school setting is preferred, that a salary range of 65 to 75 seems high to me. And I'm just wondering where we get our information to set these salary ranges. For someone with 2 years of experience in that field, that could be somebody right out of college making 65, right? Because the range is 65
So our
to
brand-new
75.
teachers right out of college, Dr. Hall, catch me if I'm wrong, is roughly $48,000, I believe, the starting salary. This is essentially less than the average salary of teachers. So our average salary of teachers is approximately $73,000, Dr. Hall. Our teachers top out over $90,000 a year. So this is commensurate with the salaries of our school-based employees. We compensate our employees competitively with the state of Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts happens to be one of the highest paid education states in the country. I believe the results show as the top education state in the country. So if that provides any point of reference for you.
I would just respond that a teacher has to be accredited from MTAL. It's not just right out of college in order to teach in a Massachusetts public school. I still think for a specialist with 2 years of experience that's a high starting point, and I wish that we could have a little bit more ranges. So if you did get somebody with 2 years experience, maybe you could start them at 55, which seems a little bit more in line with just general jobs, but I'm good. I just wanted to say
Ms.
that.
Martin?
Well, actually, I wrote the exact same thing on my agenda. 2 years' experience, only a BA. I had the exact same reaction to that in terms of the salary level. We're talking about a teacher who would still be on step one. So that is at the $48,000 level. I recognize that this is a grant-funded position. I recognize that this person is going to be doing some, work with the community. Having looked at the job description, but I do think where I don't feel like I have a strong enough understanding of the career and innovation pathways of this MyCap. I don't understand what that program is. So with the indulgence of my colleagues, I would say this could be an opportunity for us to refer this to a subcommittee. I am open to which one we would like to send it to, so that we could have a conversation about the program itself, to better, at least for myself, I'd like to better understand it, and then to better understand how this position fits within it.
Yeah, if I could, just to further help us through these numbers, a starting teacher with no experience, if you prorate it out to a 12-month position, would be at nearly $70,000 a year. Our teachers are not working 12-month positions. You'll notice the work year here is a 12-month position at 260 days. That's significantly more work time than our teachers at an 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock schedule, which is significantly longer. So I actually believe that our starting teachers are at a higher salary than this particular position. Ms. Desmond is available to answer any questions that the committee may have. This is a grant-funded position. I can tell you that we have received concerns that it is coded too low in terms of salaries, largely because of the numbers I just provided to you. If it requires further study, we'll gladly take that under consideration, but the work year, I believe Dr. Hall, our teachers are starting at $48,000 a year for a 10-month employee at 7-hour workday. This is an 8-hour workday at 12 months a year at $65,000. The prorated number is $69,333.33 for a new starting teacher with no experience in the Lowell Public Schools.
Sure.
I would like to make a motion that this be referred to the Curriculum Instruction Subcommittee for further review. Thank you.
Sure, seconded by Ms. Doherty. Ms. Clark?
I was just going to ask, is there a standard position like this that is going or being created? Are you using data surveys, compensation surveys that would evaluate it against other similar positions in either other districts or similarly situated positions across our current district, not just comparing it to starting teacher salaries, but other positions that might have similar roles and obviously annual appointments versus academic year?
Dr. Hall or Ms. Desmond, do you have further data that you can share with the committee?
So we can review it over the subcommittee, but this is a grant-funded position in collaboration with Project Learn and Middlesex Community College. It's Innovation Pathways, it's our biomedical pathway. It's a grant that we received last year. This position was written into the grant, and it's going to be able to help support students in that pathway, collecting the data on that pathway, reporting that data to the state. And so we can certainly discuss this further at the curriculum subcommittee.
So, but I would just...
It is a position that has been researched. And
right, probably.
It's part of something that state agencies have supported.
As part of the grant process, it might be compared to some other similarly situated positions that aren't necessarily in the public school system, but perhaps at Middlesex Community College and other places, so.
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoey?
Yeah, just a few things. I had two announcements, but I'm gonna give you one now because I think it might relate to this. Just recently, Middlesex Community College received $841,000 for a grant over 2 years. And it will go a long way to create a STEM hub on Middle Street. We've put a lot of money into STEM in the past few years. So this money is going to be used to pilot a Learn and Earn biotechnology program aimed at familiarizing relations with industry partners and providing career opportunities for students. So is this job title something like they'd be working with people like this? Is it the same type of thing? As a pathway?
So this position is in support of the innovation pathway that we received, the grant we received last year. And it would be specific to supporting the students at Lowell High School. You know, again, when we engage in pathway work and grant-funded work, we commit to marketing to students, families, gathering data, keeping statistics, and providing that information to the state funder. And so this position, very similar to the early college position that we also received as part of a different grant, but very similar in the sense that it's growing out career and college readiness for our students at Lowell High School.
So my last question would be, we're paying for this with a grant, correct? Mm-hmm. Why would we delay on that? I know what my colleagues are thinking, they're getting paid too much. Do you need this? Is this something that we can wait to talk about, or is it more important to get this posted and get it on, get it going?
Well, it's already going to subcommittee, so.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
We haven't voted. So if you'd like to vote again.
No, it's okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
Well, I just think it makes sense, and I like, I don't know, what I've listened to, I like to vote on it, but I can vote against it, no big deal.
Yeah, there's
All right, so why don't we just take a roll call on the motion to send this to subcommittee? Roll call?
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
No.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
No.
Mr. Dakota?
No.
4 yeas, 3 nays, motion approved.
Next motion, next budget transfer, minimum wage increase for cafeteria workers. Any questions on that? Mr. Hoey?
Move to approve.
Seconded by Ms. Clark. Roll call.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas, approved.
Okay, next is the vote to authorize MSBA statement of interest for the following schools. Motion to take and approve items 8.5 through 8.17. Vote authorizes MSBA statement of interest for the James Daly Middle School, Green Elge Elementary School, Lincoln Elementary School, McAuliffe Elementary School, Pawtucket Memorial Elementary School, STEM Academy at the Rogers, McAvenny Elementary, Moody Elementary, Merkland Elementary, Shaughnessy Elementary, Butler Middle School, Robinson Middle School, Wang Middle School, Bartlett Community Partnership School under the Accelerated Repair Program. Motion by Mr. Hoey, seconded by Ms. Martin. Do a roll call on that? Yep, roll call.
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas, approved.
So now we're on to convention and conference requests. I'd like to take a motion to take all 8 conference requests together by Mr. Dakota, second by Mr. Dillon. Roll call.
Mr.
Oh,
Mayor,
sorry.
I have a question.
Yep.
On the high school request to take kids to the Hyannis for the student council representatives, they're going to be missing 3 days of school, and I didn't see anything in the packet to say what was going to be done to cover those 3 days of kids missing school. Typically, we usually ask them to give us what they're going to be doing over those 3 days, not just doing, but dealing with their studies.
There's,
So I think we should be putting that off to the side and maybe approving the rest of them. I think we need to see something, because they're going to be missing 3 days of school. Not like they're missing half a day or 1 day. It's 3 days.
which one are you referring to?
9-8.
There's, yes, if you could, Ms. Desmond.
Thank you. So this is the Student Council Advisors. They attend this event every year. It's a different group every year because our Student Council is elected each year annually. They go with Tom Thornton, our Student Activities Advisor. The standards are covered in this document that are covered, the student standards are covered here. So when they go, they're going to be looking at how citizens monitor and influence local and state government. They're going to be looking at how to identify and explain the meaning and the importance of civics dispositions, practice civic skills, participate in activities such as simulating public hearings. These are educational sessions that they're attending the whole conference.
I understand that.
Okay.
But they're missing 3 days of school. That doesn't include a math class, or it doesn't include a French class, doesn't include any of those things. And that's all classwork that they're going to be missing, and I want to know that they're going to be taking care of that. So nothing has been included, so I think we need to get that from them before we can approve the trip.
I guess there would be a question, Ms. Desmond, in terms of, generally we bring these to you so that the school can make proper preparations and to provide the information out to children. I just want to make sure that we're clear. The message that will be going to these children is that a longstanding trip, Ms. Desmond, has not been approved by the school committee. Shavine, is this a trip that you are planning to take as the student body president, or is this a different group of young people?
This is a different group of people. It's the student council, which has its own officers, but has members of student council who can attend if they choose to.
So I just want to make, we will provide that information out. I just want to make sure that I'm clear in getting guidance from the school committee. The message I'm going to be providing is that this has not been approved by the school committee, and we are awaiting further information for school committee consideration. Am I getting proper guidance there?
I mean, it is real life learning, but
If there's an issue, a time issue in terms of booking or transportation or hotels or whatever, I mean, the trip can be approved, but we need to get this information from them.
That I can certainly do too. I just want to make sure I get proper guidance from the committee. I have no problem providing you with whatever information in a subsequent report.
If you look at the Netherlands trip,
Ms. Doherty?
that has the standards that I believe Mr. Dakota is referring to. There's a trip on the list to be approved tonight to Netherlands, Belgium, and Paris, and it says Standard 1, Standard 2, Standard 3. I believe that's what you're referring to.
That was
So
what.
it sounds to, if I can, it sounds to me like Mr. Dakota is looking for the inclusive standards for all content areas. Is that what I'm hearing?
The classes that these students are going to be missing
How they're
for
making up
3
their
days
work?
have classwork that they will be missing and will not, are they going to fulfill those requirements that those classes are going to?
I will get that information
All right.
and bring that back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dillon, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, I think, this is a positive experience for these kids, and I think this is something that we should put through tonight, and if we need more information, maybe we can request that be given to us along,
I'm open to that.
I don't know if that's okay with
Yeah,
Mr. Dakota,
Yes,
but.
yes, but I think they need to supply that to us.
I think the policy was, I'm sorry, anytime that students are missing school, there needs to be some indication about the standards that are going to be, that they're getting, from the experience.
Sure. Thank you. Motion to approve? Where are we? Roll call? Oh, I forget. We said Ms. Martin and then Mr. Hoey to approve. Now,
Okay. Mr.
did you have
Dillon?
any more
No,
questions?
second.
Okay.
No?
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Professional personnel. Members of the United Teachers of Lowell hereby donate 60 sick leave days to Jennifer McDonald, Butler School teacher. Motion to approve by Mr. Hoey, seconded by Mr. Dakota. Roll call?
Mr. Dillon?
Yes.
Ms. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mayor Leahy?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes.
7 yeas approved.
Okay, so, before we adjourn, Mr. Superintendent, could we just, Mr. Dillon, Ms. Clark, you don't have your name plates. Are they supposed to be here by now? Is that something that comes from the?
I can check on that. I know they have been ordered. Yes, absolutely. Did you have an update on that?
Well, I just know at one point Minerva had mine over at your office, and it has not made it over here.
Someone can
I
bring
don't-
those over.
You actually have the nameplate? All right.
Yeah, it's somewhere.
It's,
But
okay.
yeah, I don't know who I got up there.
I will draw you one next
Yeah.
meeting if it's,
And Mayor,
I just didn't want you to go run around if Minerva's got
you were
it.
gonna buy you 3 of them. I'll have Michael Dillon, and,
Okay. Mr. Hoey?
I'm not sure about it, but the school website might not have you on there as mayor yet. You
All
might
right,
wanna
I'll
check that too.
Thank you. So I need a motion to adjourn by Ms. Clark, seconded by Mr. Dillon with no nameplates. Now we will, so now we do the motion from up here to go into executive session.
Yeah. Yeah,
Make a motion to go into.
yeah, but Jim's gonna, hold on. Yes, I'll do it.
Mayor?
Jim, can I have that?
Mayor?
You have to adjourn to go
Go into,
We just adjourned.
okay,
We did.
all right.
Right, that's why I'm waiting for the official wording. Just
Okay.
1 second, so.
I'm ready.
So
we're
adjourn
gonna
to
do
go
a
with
roll
this
call.
executive session, roll call.
No, you're gonna, no, I have to do a roll call. Then we're gonna read that, then we're gonna go. Okay.
So roll call.
Roll call at 9:15. Ms. Doherty.
Yes.
Mr. Hoey.
Roll call.
Yes.
Mayor Leahy.
Yes.
Ms. Martin. Ms. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Dakota.
Yes.
Mr. Dillon.
Yes.
7 present. Now you need.
So now we need a motion to recess and enter an executive session for the purpose of updated negotiations with the Director of Special Education in regard to contract, review LSAA proposed MOA related to stipends and job descriptions of district support specialists and dean, review SEIU grievance on job description with grade position, litigation update, discussions on collective bargaining with LSAA for successor agreement, discussion of collective bargaining with SEIU for successor agreement, discussion of collective bargaining for UTL for successor agreement, discussion of MOA with UTL regarding evaluation timeline, and evaluation of which public discussion could have a detrimental effect on the city's position to adjourn, then to adjourn from executive session by Mr. Hoey, seconded by Ms. Doherty. Roll call.
Ms. Doherty.
Yes.
Mr. Hoey.
Yes.
Mayor Leahy.
Yes.
Ms. Martin. Ms. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Dakota.
Yes.
Mr. Dillon.
Yes.
7 yeas.
Thank you.
What I did
Yes,
want to
yeah, hi.
comment on.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Was that the students who currently on this trip, I can assure you, will make up the 3 days of work. It is a lot to think about,
I know,
but it's a guarantee.
but we need to have this paper that says what they're going to be doing
Yeah, I don't think
while
we were
they're on that trip.
really concerned that these kids were